Chapter 1. It was already 1 in the morning. Grace Ainsworth stood alone by the dining table, taking the food that had gone completely cold to the kitchen to heat it up once more. Today was her 3rd wedding anniversary with Julian Hawthorne, but her husband had yet to return. Bang! A loud crash at the door suddenly pulled Grace back from her thoughts. She hurried over to open it, and a strong smell of alcohol hit her instantly. Julian Hawthorne was leaning against the door, barely conscious. His handsome brows were knitted together, his long lashes fluttered, and he murmured a name. "Sylvia!" Grace's breath caught in her throat. Her heart felt as if a poisoned needle had been brutally stabbed into it, the pain tearing through her entire body. She had always known. Her husband's eyes, his heart, they were all filled with another woman. Pushing down her sorrow, she reached out to support Julian, helping him to the sofa. But as she went to stand up, her foot slipped, and she fell right into Julian's arms. His disgust for her seemed to be a conditioned reflex. Julian, who had been in a stupor, suddenly opened his eyes and shoved her away with revulsion. "Grace, you are disgusting." He glanced around at the living room decorations, his face growing colder, especially when his eyes landed on the large sign that read, "Happy Wedding Anniversary." The chill in his gaze was like a tidal wave crashing toward her. He strode forward, tore the sign to shreds, and threw it contemptuously to the floor. Then, he viciously grabbed her by the neck. "Sylvia is in the hospital, fighting for her life, and you have the nerve to celebrate." Tears welled in Grace's eyes as the image of Sylvia Ainsworth's vibrant, beautiful face flashed in her mind. 3 years ago, the Hawthorne group had faced a crisis. Grace had cried and begged her father to help Julian. Walter Ainsworth, knowing his daughter's deep affection for Julian, proposed a marriage alliance as a condition for funding the Hawthorne group. Sylvia, who also loved Julian deeply, confronted Grace. After a tirade of accusations, she jumped into the sea right in front of her. When Julian arrived, all he saw was a panicked Grace standing on the shore, and he immediately condemned her without hesitation. Although Sylvia was rescued, she had swallowed water, which led to myocarditis and eventually heart failure. If a suitable heart transplant couldn't be found, she wouldn't have long to live. For that, Julian hated her to the core. She loved Julian so deeply. How could she bear to see him suffer? She would have divorced him immediately after her father provided the funds if he had just asked, but he never believed her. A sharp pain stabbed at her stomach, making her tremble uncontrollably. She weakly clutched Julian's arm. "Julian, it hurts," he sneered and threw her hand off. "Stop putting on a show. You call this pain? Have you ever thought about how much it hurt Sylvia when she fell from that cliff? You knew how important she is to me. You just couldn't stand her, could you?" The light in Grace's eyes faded, bit by bit. Just because Sylvia had saved him once, he showered her with endless affection. But no one knew that the person who had actually saved Julian from the snow was her that year. He'd had a car accident, and the fuel tank was leaking. It was she who had risked her life to pull him from the car. Julian had been unconscious at the time, and after saving him, Grace was knocked out by the car's explosion. When she woke up, Sylvia had become Julian's savior. Her thoughts returned to the present. Grace forced back her tears and looked at him. "Julian, what will it take for you to believe that I never forced Sylvia to do anything?" His brow furrowed, his handsome face a mask of extreme coldness. His thin lips parted, and every word he spoke pushed her into an abyss. "Unless you die?" Chapter 2. The words of a loved one often cut the deepest. Grace had loved Julian Hawthorne for a full decade. That love had carried her from her youth to this day, but now, in his eyes, it was utterly worthless. And yet, she didn't even have the right to complain. This marriage, this love, it was all her own choice. Because she loved him, she could set aside her identity as an heiress and become Mrs. Hawthorne, a devoted wife. Because she loved him, she could endure all the slander and insults. Because she loved him, she could humble herself completely, abandoning even her pride. Now, just as Julian wished, she was indeed about to die. 3 days ago, Grace had been diagnosed with stomach cancer. The doctor said it was late stage. The cancer cells had already spread to her lungs, and the possibility of a cure was practically zero. What a shame. She was only 25, with so much left to do. Most importantly, Julian hadn't fallen in love with her yet. It seemed now she would never live to see that day. The day after her wedding anniversary, Grace received news that the Ainsworth family company was on the verge of bankruptcy due to a massive financial deficit. Over the years, Julian had been ruthless in the business world, building the Hawthorne Group into an untouchable empire. His company's strength had long surpassed the Ainsworths. Grace knew what the Ainsworth Group meant to her father. No matter what, she had to find a way to save his company. And now, the only person who could help her was Julian Hawthorne. Though the chances were slim, for her father's sake, she had to try. Knowing Julian was at the Nocturne Club tonight, Grace hailed a cab and rushed over. When she pushed open the door to the private room, the cloying scent of perfume mixed with alcohol made her eyes sting. All eyes turned to her. Upon seeing who it was, knowing smirks appeared on their faces. Well, isn't it Mrs. Hawthorne? Mr. Hawthorne, don't tell me you're henpecked." In the center of the sofa, Julian sat with his long legs crossed, his refined face exuding a cold aura. Is she even worthy? A pang of pain shot through Grace's heart. She suppressed the mist in her eyes and slowly walked to Julian's side, speaking in a placating tone. "Julian, I need to talk to you. Can we go home first?" Julian's lips curled into a cold smirk. He leaned back on the sofa, showing no intention of getting up. "If you have something to say it here." How could she bring herself to ask her own husband for a loan in front of so many people? Grace's face burned hot. "Can we please talk about it at home?" His expression was frosty, offering her no dignity. "Don't test my patience. If you don't want to say it, then get out." Grace bit her lip, her face so red it looked like it might bleed. "Dad's company is in trouble. Can you lend me some money? I'll pay you back. As soon as the company is back on its feet, I'll pay you back immediately." A look of disdain crossed Julian's icy face. He stood up, looking down at her. The high and mighty princess of the Ainsworth family is actually begging someone for help. Grace didn't dare to look up at him, but she heard his heartless words from above. "If you want my help, fine. Drink this entire bottle of liquor, and I'll lend the Ainsworth family the money." Chapter 3. She glanced down at the freshly opened bottle of liquor on the table, her brow tightening involuntarily. The pungent smell of alcohol felt like an invisible hand, twisting her stomach into knots of searing pain. The doctor had told her that her condition was already critical. She needed to be extremely careful with her diet, especially avoiding alcohol. Drinking this entire bottle would likely cost her half her life. "What, scared? I'm just asking you to drink one bottle, and you're already so reluctant. If you're not willing, then get the hell out." Hearing Julian's sarcastic words, the pain in Grace's heart overwhelmed everything else. She picked up the bottle, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "I'll drink." With that, she didn't hesitate. She lifted the bottle to her lips and began to chug. "So be it," she thought. "He doesn't care if I live or die anyway." As long as she could save her father's company, what did this humiliation and pain matter? The fiery alcohol burned its way into her stomach, feeling like a raging fire that nearly robbed her of her senses. But the piercing pain forced her to stay conscious, again and again. Julian's brow furrowed slightly as he watched Grace, who was choking on the alcohol with tears streaming down her face, yet still tilting her head back and forcing the liquor down. A heavy stone seemed to press on his heart, making him restless and agitated. Damn it, he clearly hated her, so why did he feel no sense of satisfaction watching her suffer like this? His face darkened. He reached out and forcefully snatched the bottle from her hands. "Don't waste my good liquor. Take the money and get lost." As he spoke, he pulled a check from his pocket and threw it contemptuously at her face. Grace froze for a moment before picking up the check from the floor. A metallic, sweet taste rose in her throat. Without another moment's delay, she stumbled out of the room. Leaving the private room, Grace rushed blindly toward the nearby restroom. "Ugh!" She leaned over the sink, staring at the startling red in the basin, unable to process it for a long time. "Has my illness already progressed this far? I only drank half a bottle and I'm already vomiting blood. How many days do I have left?" Numbly, Grace turned on the faucet and washed the crimson stain down the drain. When she arrived at the Ainsworth Group with the check from Julian, she saw the police escorting Walter Ainsworth away. Grace chased after the car, but in the end, she could only watch as he disappeared from sight. His assistant told her that a major problem had occurred with one of the company's projects, and the police had to take Walter in for questioning. Even with the money she brought, it wouldn't solve the Ainsworth Group's problems now. She returned to the Hawthorne residence in a daze. The moment she pushed open the door, she couldn't hold on any longer and fainted. When she woke up, she was in a hospital. To her surprise, the person sitting by her bedside was Julian Hawthorne. A foolish hope sparked within her. Could this mean that he cared about her, even just a little? Seeing her awake, Julian's handsome face was coated in a layer of frost, and his eyes held a hint of displeasure. "Grace, your family is about to go bankrupt, and you still have the mind to play the victim in front of me." Chapter 4. That flicker of hope was instantly extinguished. Before Grace could explain, Dr. Evan Kendall, who was standing nearby, spoke first. "Julian Hawthorne, can you not be so cruel? Even a grown man would struggle after drinking that much, let alone Grace, who has." Remembering Grace's request, he changed his tack. "Her stomach can't handle that kind of abuse." As both her attending physician and her best friend, Evan couldn't bear to see Grace so wronged. In these final days, Grace didn't want any more complications, so Evan was the only one who knew about her illness. Julian's lips curled into a cold smirk. "Dr. Kendall, you seem quite concerned about my wife. Could it be that you two have some kind of unspeakable relationship?" Evan's hands clenched into fists. "Julian Hawthorne, you've gone too far. You don't deserve Grace," Julian scoffed. "Whether I deserve her or not is none of your business. She was the one who begged to marry me." "You," Evan's face turned pale with anger, his hands trembling uncontrollably. "One day you will regret everything you've done today." He glanced disdainfully at Grace, his eyes filled with a chilling finality. "Don't worry, that day will never come." A phone suddenly rang, breaking the tense atmosphere. Julian pulled his phone from his pocket. After a single hello, his expression changed drastically. "I'll be right there." He hung up, slammed the door, and left, leaving a pale-faced Grace behind. There was only one person who could make him so anxious. It must be that Sylvia's condition had worsened, which was why he had rushed off in such a panic. No matter the time or place, between her and Sylvia, he would always choose the latter. Looking at the lonely figure of Grace, Evan's face was full of worry. "Grace, your condition is deteriorating too quickly. You need to be hospitalized for chemotherapy." She shook her head. Whether she received treatment or not, the outcome would be the same. Why should she suffer in a hospital? "Evan, I know you mean well. If you really care about me, just prescribe me more painkillers." She wasn't being dramatic, but when the pain in her stomach flared up, it felt like it would tear her apart. She didn't want to show any weakness in front of Julian, so she could only rely on painkillers to maintain a facade of peace. Evan's face was grim. "Are you really not going to tell Julian Hawthorne? He's your husband, after all. You went through so much to help him rebuild the Hawthorne Group. How can he treat you like this?" She gave a bitter smile. "He doesn't know anything. I can't blame him. It was all her own doing. No one else was to blame. The only one to blame, she supposed, was herself for loving Julian Hawthorne too much. She didn't stay in the hospital for long before going home. Despite Evan's repeated attempts to persuade her, he couldn't change her mind. Everyone knew that the lady of the house was kind and generous, treating the staff with benevolence and approachability. No one understood why such a beautiful and kind woman couldn't find a way into Julian Hawthorne's heart. For the next several days, Julian didn't come home. The gossip, however, spread quickly. Everyone was saying that the CEO of the Hawthorne Group had stood vigil at a hospital for 3 days and 3 nights for a woman, and that woman was not his wife. Grace had heard such rumors so often that she had become numb to them. At night, the pain in her stomach became unbearable. In a daze, she fumbled for the medicine in her bedside drawer and popped a pill into her mouth. Not long after, she heard the roar of a car engine, followed by Julian's furious footsteps. He threw the door open, his deep eyes bloodshot, yet his gaze toward her remained as cold and heartless as ever. Even after days without proper rest, he still exuded an intimidating, unapproachable aura. "Do you have any idea how serious Sylvia's condition is now? And do you have any idea how serious my condition is?" Her mouth opened, but her heart ached along with the unspoken words. After a long silence, she said nothing. 3 years. This 3-year marriage had been nothing but torture for both of them. Her time was running out. If that was the case, she might as well give him his freedom. Grace propped herself up and found the divorce agreement in the bedside drawer. As she pulled the document out, she accidentally knocked over the bottle of painkillers on the nightstand. The bottle rolled to Julian's feet. Grace's heart leaped into her throat. Just as she was about to speak, she saw him bend down and pick it up. The word apatinib was starkly printed on the label. This was a drug for stomach cancer. Chapter 5. Under the shroud of night, Julian clutched the pill bottle, and suddenly everything became clear. He let out a cold laugh and smashed the bottle against the wall. "Miss Ainsworth, you're quite the actress, aren't you? What, trying to pull the same stunt as Sylvia? Faking cancer to win my sympathy?" Grace's lips twitched into a smile, but it looked more painful than a sob. A single tear from Sylvia could make his heart ache for nights on end. But even if she died in front of him, he wouldn't so much as bat an eye. Grace suppressed the bitterness in her heart. "You saw right through me. You like Sylvia so much, so I thought maybe this would make you like me a little too. But I've seen things clearly now. The pill bottle was a fake, but this divorce agreement is real." She handed him the document, enunciating each word. "Julian Hawthorne, let's get a divorce, you're free." Julian laughed coldly, but instead of signing as she wished, he snatched the papers from her hand. "So, you've found someone new. No wonder you've got so much backbone all of a sudden. Are you in such a hurry to divorce me because you're afraid Dr. Kendall can't wait?" He forcefully tore the divorce agreement to shreds. "Grace, I refuse to give you what you want." With that, he turned and stormed out. Grace bit her lip until it hurt, letting silent tears stream down her face. For all these years, her heart had held only Julian Hawthorne, but he never believed in her love for him. The next morning, Julian left early. The staff said that Miss Ainsworth at the hospital wasn't feeling well, so the young master had rushed to see her. She was long accustomed to Julian's neglect. Anyway, she was dying soon. Perhaps this was the best possible ending. Today was her follow-up appointment at the hospital. She chose a brightly colored dress, not wanting to look too pale and have to listen to Evan's nagging. After arriving at the hospital and finishing her checkup, Grace sat on a bench in the hallway to rest. She never expected to run into Sylvia Ainsworth there. Although Sylvia had heart failure, apart from a pale complexion, she looked no different from usual. In contrast, Grace was the one who looked utterly haggard. Seeing Grace, a flash of surprise crossed Sylvia's eyes, quickly replaced by a smile as she walked over. "Grace, long time no see. How have you been?" Grace kept her head down and stood up to leave, but Sylvia grabbed her sleeve. "I heard the Ainsworth group went bankrupt and your father was arrested. Serves him right." Grace's breath hitched, and she forcefully shook Sylvia's hand off. "Get lost." A glint of hatred appeared in Sylvia's eyes. "Your family owes me so much. Now I'm going to take it all back, bit by bit." Grace turned to face her. "My family has never owed you anything." Sylvia's lips curled into a cold smirk. "If it weren't for you all, I would have been the rightful Mrs. Hawthorne long ago, and I wouldn't have ended up like this. Grace, you've always been so high and mighty. How does it feel now? Julian's heart belongs only to me. Sooner or later, he's going to kick you to the curb." Grace looked up, her gaze calm. "I never wanted to compete with you. Since you two are in love, I'll give you the title of Mrs. Hawthorne." "Give?" Sylvia narrowed her eyes, retorting disdainfully. "Are you even worthy?" Grace had no intention of continuing this argument. Just as she turned to leave, Sylvia suddenly clutched her heart and collapsed to the floor. Chapter 6. Miss Ainsworth, nurses and doctors instantly swarmed around her, performing CPR on the spot. Grace was stunned by the scene, taking a few dazed steps back. Someone in the crowd started to blame her. "What's wrong with you? Don't you know the patient has a heart condition and can't be agitated?" She frantically tried to explain, but was cut off by the sound of urgent footsteps from behind. The newcomer forcefully pushed her aside, broke through the crowd, and carefully lifted Sylvia into his arms. Grace steadied herself against the wall to keep from falling. A cold sweat trickled down her back, sending shivers through her. Even from just his back, Grace recognized the handsome man as Julian Hawthorne, but from beginning to end, he never once looked at her. As if possessed, Grace followed behind him until he carried Sylvia into a hospital room. Only then did she stop. Through the window of the room door, she watched Julian gently place Sylvia on the bed, softly wipe the sweat from her brow with a towel, and then tuck her in. The look in the eyes of someone in love cannot be hidden. He really seemed to love her. It was only in that moment that Grace truly realized that even after being married to him for 3 years, she had never truly possessed him. And now, she was about to lose him completely. She wiped her tears and stumbled away. At the same time, the door to the room opened. Julian strode toward her, step by step. The dark glint in his eyes was like a series of daggers, poised to pierce right through her. "Grace, how can your heart be so venomous?" Forced back by his approach, Grace stumbled a few steps. Before she could speak, Julian's eyes looked as if they were thirsting for blood. "If it weren't for you, why would Sylvia have jumped into the sea? How would she have contracted myocarditis and ended up with heart failure? And now you still won't let her go. What did you say to agitate her and make her lose consciousness?" A sharp pain shot through her chest, making her tremble uncontrollably. She clutched her chest. "I didn't, it was her." Julian let out a mocking laugh. "Right, a woman like you would never admit to what you've done. You even tried to take Sylvia's place after the car accident." After the accident, she had tried to explain the truth to Julian, but he had already made up his mind about Sylvia and wouldn't listen to a word she said. Grace looked into his merciless eyes and suddenly lost the will to explain. He wouldn't believe her. In all these years, when had he ever believed her? In his eyes, she was selfish, despicable, and deceitful, completely unworthy of his trust. Grace bit her lip so hard it nearly bled. "Think whatever you want." Seeing her aggrieved and defenseless appearance only fueled Julian's disgust. He grabbed her by the collar, each word a forceful shove into the abyss. "Why isn't it you who's suffering? You'd better pray day and night that Sylvia finds a suitable heart donor. Otherwise, I will never forgive you in this lifetime." Chapter 7. Lying in bed late that night, Julian's cold, heartless words still echoed in Grace's mind. She used to think that every extra day she could live was a blessing, but now it seemed her existence was meaningless. "Julian, if I trade my life for Sylvia's, will you feel even a flicker of love or reluctance to let me go?" Since he despised her in life, she might as well do one thing that could bring him happiness. The next morning, Grace rose early as usual. In all the years she had been married into the Hawthorne family, she had woken up early every day to make Julian breakfast. They had staff, but she never wanted to entrust anything related to Julian to others. Given her current condition, even cooking was a struggle. By the time she finished making breakfast, her face was pale and she was drenched in sweat. One of the maids couldn't help but speak. "Madam, you've made breakfast so many times, but the master has rarely eaten it. Is it worth it?" What was there to be worth it or not? Everything was her own choice, something she did willingly. Grace set the breakfast on the table, changed into a different outfit, and put on some light makeup. This was the dress she wore when she and Julian had first met years ago. Now, it felt a little loose. The torment of stomach cancer had caused her to lose over a dozen pounds. She hadn't noticed before, but wearing old clothes made the difference starkly obvious. Julian was already downstairs. Grace quickly spoke up. "I made your favorite sandwiches. Have some breakfast before you go. After all, he might never have the chance to eat it again." Julian glanced at her. The dress seemed vaguely familiar. He hadn't paid much attention before, but today he noticed just how thin this woman had become. Damn it, are we too poor to afford food in this house? Who is she trying to look so pitiful for? Right, she was always good at putting on a show to gain sympathy. A couple of days ago, she was crying about being in pain, and then she made a show of taking painkillers in front of him. It was all because she saw him caring for Sylvia lately and wanted to get his attention. Hadn't she used countless tricks on him over the years? Anger flared within him, and his gaze turned cold. "I'm not worthy of a breakfast made by Miss Ainsworth. You should keep it for yourself." With that, he pushed open the main door, walked into the courtyard, started his car, and sped away. Watching his departing figure, Grace's heart filled with sorrow. It seemed he wouldn't even grant her the chance for one last breakfast together. Grace went upstairs, packed her clothes, and signed a newly drafted divorce agreement, placing it on the desk in her room. The agreement stated that after the divorce, all assets of the Ainsworth Group would be transferred to Julian Hawthorne, and she, Grace Ainsworth, would leave with nothing. Although the Ainsworth Group was now bankrupt, its subsidiaries were still operating. Whether Julian wanted to acquire them or sell the shares, it was all up to him. This, besides her own life, was the only thing she could give him, though he probably didn't care about it at all. In the closet, 50 neatly arranged boxes sat in a row of birthday gifts she had prepared for Julian for the next 50 years. She picked up her suitcase and took one last look at the room. Goodbye, Julian Hawthorne. Chapter 8. After leaving the Hawthorne residence, Grace went straight to the hospital. She knew that at this time, Julian would be at the office handling business. But this time, she wasn't there for a checkup. She was there to see Sylvia Ainsworth. The doctor had just finished his rounds. Sylvia was sitting on her bed reading. When she saw Grace, she looked a little surprised. "You've got a lot of nerve coming here again." Grace sat down beside her and began to speak without preamble. "I'm not here to argue with you. I just have a few things to say, and then I'll leave." Sylvia gave a cold, dismissive smile. "If you're here to beg me not to take Julian from you, I suggest you give up that idea." Grace calmly shook her head. "Julian and I are divorced. From now on, you will never see me again. I came today to tell you to take good care of Julian in the future. His stomach is weak, so try to have him eat out less. He likes soup. I've written down all the recipes in this notebook for you. When he sleeps, it needs to be very quiet around him, without any disturbances. The staff at home know all this, and I hope you can do the same. I've also noted down some of his other habits in the notebook. You can read it at your leisure. Finally, please live well. Don't betray Julian's love." After speaking, she didn't spare Sylvia another glance. She pushed open the door and walked out. This was all she could do. Julian had just finished his work and was on his way to the hospital when he received a call from the hospital director. "Mr. Hawthorne, we've found a matching heart for Miss Ainsworth. Please come to the hospital to sign the papers immediately." He quickly got out of his car and hurried to the director's office. Upon seeing Julian, the director was ecstatic. "Mr. Hawthorne, after all these years, we've finally found a suitable heart. Miss Ainsworth's condition can't wait any longer." Sylvia's condition had been worsening, and Julian had been watching with growing anxiety. For the first time in his life, he was faced with a problem that money couldn't solve. If Sylvia hadn't risked her life to pull him from that exploding car years ago, he wouldn't be alive today. So, no matter what, he had to keep Sylvia alive. Now that a suitable heart had been found, he was naturally overjoyed. "Can we contact the donor? I'd like to offer some compensation to them or their family." The director waved his hand. "The donor has requested to remain anonymous. I looked at the file. The donor themselves has late-stage stomach cancer and their condition has deteriorated. They probably don't have much time left." For some reason, an image of Grace's cool, composed face flashed in Julian's mind. Lately, she always seemed to be clutching her chest, looking like she was in a lot of pain. An inexplicable twitch tightened his chest, followed by a heavy sense of unease. "Damn it, I shouldn't be thinking about that woman." Julian frowned in displeasure, quickly signed the papers, and instructed the director to take good care of Sylvia and to notify him immediately when the surgery began. He had originally planned to visit Sylvia, but for some reason, he had lost the desire. He turned, walked back to the hospital entrance, and drove back to the Hawthorne estate. He pushed open the main door. The living room was quiet. Unlike usual, Grace did not come forward to greet him. He glanced at the staff. "Where is Madam?" The staff member just shook her head. "Madam left with her luggage early this morning and hasn't returned." Julian's brow furrowed into a deep line. Left with her luggage? Is she playing that running away from home game again? He strode upstairs and opened Grace's room. Her things were all neatly packed away. The only thing on the desk was a divorce agreement. Next to it was a card. "Julian, may you have peace and joy, year after year. And I wish you and Sylvia a lifetime of happiness together." Chapter 9. The words on the card stung Julian's eyes so fiercely that he couldn't bring himself to read them a second time. This time she was serious? Why? After shamelessly clinging to his side for so many years, why leave now and with such hypocritical, high-sounding words? He turned his head, scanning her room. It was immaculate, so clean that it lacked any sign of life. The bedside cabinet was ajar. He couldn't resist walking over and opening it. Countless exquisitely wrapped gift boxes appeared before his eyes. Shock flickered in Julian's eyes. He randomly picked up a box and opened it. Inside was a finely crafted watch, with a card next to it. "Julian, happy 35th birthday." A bad premonition bloomed in his heart. He grabbed another box, not bothering to look at the gift, and flipped open the card. "Julian, happy 39th birthday. May you be happy every year and may all your wishes come true." He started to panic, opening the boxes one by one. Every single box wished him a happy birthday for a different year. Why? Why would she prepare so many years' worth of gifts at once? Julian stood up, went to her bedside, and pulled everything out of the cabinet, but he found nothing else. There was nothing. She had left no other clues. He scoffed internally. He must be overthinking it. What kind of trick was this woman trying to play this time? His gaze fell upon the documents scattered on the floor. Suddenly, a diagnosis report caught his eye. He crouched down and picked it up. The report stated, late-stage stomach cancer, and in the name field, the name Grace Ainsworth was printed in bold, recalling Grace's series of strange behaviors. Julian's nerves suddenly tensed. Impossible. How could this be possible? With her personality, if she knew she had stomach cancer, she would have made sure everyone knew about it. Then she would use her illness to demand his concern, to win his sympathy. That was her usual tactic, a trick she had used countless times. Just as he was about to pull out his phone to call and question her, the phone in his hand suddenly rang. Julian stood up and walked to the window. He didn't even realize his hand was trembling slightly. He gripped the phone tightly and answered the call. Mr. Hawthorne, you need to come to the hospital right away. The donor who matched with Miss Ainsworth just passed away. We're about to begin the heart transplant surgery for Miss Ainsworth immediately. For Julian, this should have been excellent news. But at this moment, he felt as if an invisible hand was choking him, making it hard to even breathe. He loosened his collar, trying to catch his breath. Tell me the donor's name. The person on the other end of the line was evasive, repeatedly stating that the donor's privacy could not be disclosed. Mr. Hawthorne, it's not that I won't tell you. Although the donor didn't sign a confidentiality agreement, she specifically requested that you not be informed. Her identity is nothing special, just a housewife. He lost his patience, his voice laced with authority and menace. I'll say it one last time. Tell me the donor's name. The person on the other end finally relented. Grace Ainsworth, the lady who donated her heart to Miss Ainsworth. Her name is Grace Ainsworth, Chapter 10. What? The person who donated her heart to Sylvia was really Grace. Although he had mentally prepared himself after seeing the terminal cancer diagnosis, when Julian actually heard the donor's name, he was in utter disbelief. No. Julian staggered back a few steps, roaring, "Get me a detailed file on the donor immediately. I'm on my way." Even now, Julian clung to a sliver of hope. What if the donor just happened to share the same name as Grace? Julian, normally a man obsessed with cleanliness, paid no mind to the room he had just ransacked. Desperate to confirm Grace's safety, he bolted out of the house and sped toward the hospital. He floored the accelerator, turning a half-hour drive into a frantic 15-minute race. The luxury car screeched to a halt in front of the hospital, leaving huge skid marks. Before the car had even fully stopped, Julian burst into the building. A heart transplant surgery could not be interrupted, so the doctors had begun as soon as they hung up the phone with him. By the time Julian arrived, the surgery-in-progress light was already on. Dr. Williams, the lead surgeon who had spoken to him on the phone, was already deep in the meticulous operation. He had left his assistant, Liam, outside to wait for Julian. Seeing Julian running in, breathless and frantic, the assistant hurried to meet him. "Mr. Hawthorne, you're here. Where's Grace? Where is she?" Julian was on the verge of a breakdown. The assistant quickly handed him a file. "Mr. Hawthorne, this is the document you asked for." With a trembling hand, Julian took the report, the words "heart donation agreement" emblazoned across the top. There was no photo, but the handwriting was one Julian knew all too well. It was Grace's handwriting. The person who donated her heart to Sylvia, it really was his wife, Grace. The donation agreement slipped from Julian's grasp. His hands shook as he felt the universe was playing a cruel, monstrous joke on him. He had only just learned of Grace's terminal cancer, and now he was hearing of her death. Julian no longer had the heart to care about Sylvia's surgery. He looked at Dr. Williams's assistant again. The heart donor. She just passed away, didn't she? Even though he had heard the news of Grace's death with his own ears over the phone, Julian couldn't help but seek confirmation one more time. Few people knew about Grace and Julian's marriage, so Liam, the assistant, found Julian's reaction a bit strange. "Yes, Mr. Hawthorne. How could anyone survive after having their heart removed?" Thinking Julian was moved by compassion, Liam added, "But the donor was already in the final stages of stomach cancer. She only had a few days left to live anyway. Mr. Hawthorne, you don't need to be sad. If it were me, I would donate my organs too. Even if I couldn't live, at least I could save someone else's life. A look of agony crossed Julian's face. He closed his eyes. Where is the donor's body? I want to see her. The donor's body was sent for cremation immediately after the heart was removed. The cremation has probably already started by now. That was also the donor's wish. What? The hospital had a crematorium right behind it, where deceased patients were typically taken. Julian could no longer spare a thought for Sylvia in the operating room. He sprinted towards the crematorium. No. He couldn't let Grace be cremated, Chapter 11. But when Julian reached the crematorium, he found the large gates shut tight. The 4 words "cremation in progress" glowed a startling, bloody red. Julian wanted to charge inside, but the crematorium gates were heavy and solid, impossible for a mere mortal to break through. The gatekeeper, an old man, pulled him back indifferently. You're the family of the deceased, right? The dead can't be brought back to life. Don't waste your energy. You can queue up here in an hour to collect the urn. Julian could no longer stand. He swayed and fell to his knees, a desperate, hoarse cry escaping his throat. Why? Why did his heart ache so terribly upon learning of Grace's death? Grace was just a scheming woman who had used their marriage to threaten him during a crisis. How could he possibly feel pain for her? But the scene in Julian's mind shifted. Suddenly, his thoughts were filled with images of Grace by his side as he rebuilt the Hawthorne Group from its ruins. Back then, Julian had worked day and night for the company, and no matter how late he worked, Grace would stay up with him. 3 years ago, when the Hawthorne Group faced a financial crisis, it was the Ainsworth Group that had offered unlimited funding on the condition of their marriage. At the time, Julian had only seen the Ainsworths and Grace as opportunists, taking advantage of his misfortune. He had forgotten how rare and significant unlimited funding was. After all, few would be willing to bet their entire fortune on a teetering, near-bankrupt company with an uncertain future. Just like Julian himself had been with the Ainsworth Group now. He knew that the current Ainsworth Group was a spent force. No amount of funding from him would save it. From a businessman's perspective, Julian's choice was undoubtedly the best one. But Julian had forgotten how the Ainsworth Group had extended a helping hand when the Hawthorne Group was in the same predicament 3 years ago. Logically, Julian's choice was optimal. He wasn't wrong. But emotionally, as a former beneficiary, as the husband to a daughter of that family, his inaction was inexcusable. Not to mention, his father-in-law, Walter Ainsworth, had been imprisoned for being unable to repay his massive debts. Julian's actions had sparked much debate. Some called him a ruthless but effective businessman. Others called him an ungrateful wretch who turned his back on his benefactors. Julian suddenly remembered the sight of Grace, alone, coming to the Nocturne Club just a few days ago. Grace had been born into a wealthy family and had always been proud. Yet a woman as proud as her had been willing to ask him for money in such a public place, begging him to help the Ainsworth Group. And what had he said then? He had said, "If you want my help, fine. Drink this entire bottle of liquor, and I'll lend the Ainsworth family the money." At the thought, Julian slammed his fist violently onto the ground. The reason he'd said that was because he'd heard a rumor in high society that the eldest daughter of the Ainsworth family was a heavy drinker with an incredible tolerance for alcohol. Julian had thought that 1 bottle of liquor would be nothing for someone like her. He had intended it as a way to give Grace an out, and to give himself a reason to help her and the Ainsworth Group. But he hadn't known that at that time, Grace was already in the final stages of stomach cancer. Chapter 12. No wonder she had choked on the alcohol, and her eyes had teared up after just half a bottle that day. At the time, Julian had dismissed it as her being overly dramatic and felt contempt for her. He never imagined she might actually be sick. When you think someone is acting strange, they might be suffering. Only today did Julian truly understand the meaning of that sentence. And he never, ever imagined that Grace would be willing to donate her own heart to Sylvia. In Julian's mind, Grace was selfish, despicable, and deceitful, so he felt nothing but disgust for her. But he never thought that her words about wanting him and Sylvia to be together were sincere, and that she would be willing to make such a great sacrifice to make it happen. Why did she donate her heart without saying a word? Did Grace even consider him her husband? Didn't she say there should be no secrets between a husband and wife? Then what was this? hiding her terminal cancer and her decision to donate her heart from him. A person like Grace, upon learning she had cancer, shouldn't she have made a huge scene about it? And then used her illness to demand his concern, to win his sympathy? Wasn't that her usual tactic? But why didn't she? Julian raised his head, his posture defeated. He suddenly remembered the moment Grace's anti-cancer medication had fallen at his feet. He had mocked her for being overly dramatic, accusing her of taking painkillers for a mere stomachache. So it wasn't that Grace didn't want to tell him. It was that even if she had, he wouldn't have believed her. Because in his heart, Julian Hawthorne had always seen her as a woman who would stop at nothing to get what she wanted. A belated sense of regret washed over Julian. In their 3 years of marriage, what had he ever given Grace? Endless complaints and ridicule, a home where he never returned, a marriage that existed in name only. The only benefit was a relatively affluent lifestyle, but for Grace, who was born with a silver spoon, that was nothing. She never cared about money. So for Grace, those 3 years of marriage had brought nothing but pain. An inexplicable panic seized Julian. He had always thought only of himself, assuming Grace was just an obstacle between him and Sylvia, a usurper who had taken a place that wasn't hers. But Julian had never considered that with Grace's status and family background 3 years ago, she could have married a man infinitely better than he was at the time. Now, Julian finally realized how terribly wrong he had been, but Grace was already gone, separated from him by death. Julian knelt at the entrance of the crematorium, not getting up for a long time. His assistant, Leo, came by once. Seeing Julian on the ground, he tried to help him up, but Julian refused. "Mr. Hawthorne, I've been looking everywhere for you. What are you doing here? Miss Sylvia Ainsworth's surgery is over. Dr. Williams asked me to inform you that the operation was a success, and she has been moved to a VIP room. She'll wake up after the anesthesia wears off. Would you like to go see her?" Julian didn't answer, just shook his head. Leo found Julian's behavior very strange. Why on earth was he kneeling in front of a crematorium? Had someone died? But he didn't dare to ask more questions. After delivering his report, he quickly left. Julian didn't know how long he waited at the crematorium gate. As the sky gradually darkened, the cremation in progress light finally went out. The heavy stone door slowly opened with a grating sound. Julian slowly raised his head, feeling a wave of heat wash over him. A person walked out from inside and placed a small, white porcelain urn in front of him. "You're Grace Ainsworth's family, right? This is her urn. Please take it. My condolences." Chapter 13. Upon hearing those words, Julian extended a trembling hand, wanting to hold the small porcelain urn. It was within arm's reach, yet Julian felt it was impossibly far, just as he could never touch Grace again. Julian clutched the small porcelain urn as if it were a priceless treasure, then shakily stood up. He didn't go to see Sylvia, who was still unconscious in the VIP room. Instead, he took Grace back to their home. He had already arranged the best room and care for Sylvia. She would be fine. The thought that the once vibrant Grace was now reduced to this small urn brought a wave of sorrow over Julian. He walked into what used to be Grace's room. The room was a mess from his earlier rampage, but he didn't care. He held the urn, sat on the floor, and picked up the divorce agreement from the ground. Grace's name was signed on it. Her handwriting, like her, was cool and elegant. He hadn't had a chance to read it carefully before. Now, as he did, he saw that Grace had written in the terms of the agreement. After the divorce, all assets of the Ainsworth Group would be transferred to Julian Hawthorne, and she, Grace Ainsworth, would leave with nothing. Julian suddenly felt like a ridiculous clown. To think he had believed she wanted a divorce to split his assets. But not only had she asked for nothing, she had given him everything she owned, including her most precious life. When Grace had proposed the divorce, he had even spewed baseless accusations about her and Evan Kendall. At this thought, Julian couldn't help but slap himself hard across the face. At that moment, the wall clock struck 8. Julian's phone chimed with an email notification. He had no mind to check it, but the email's voice notification spoke up. "You have a new email. Sender, Grace Ainsworth." Julian froze for a second, then fumbled for his phone, his hands shaking as he opened his inbox. Grace is dead, isn't she? How could she be sending him an email? Is this all some kind of sick joke? There was no text in the email, only a voice message. Julian pressed play, and Grace's all too familiar voice filled the room. "Julian, by the time you receive this voice message, I think I'm already dead." The first sentence was enough to make Julian's hopeful heart plummet back into the abyss. So it wasn't a joke. It was a final testament. "Julian, a selfish part of me hopes you'll forget me, but another part of me doesn't want you to forget me so quickly. I'm so conflicted, I'm sorry. I know you never loved me. I was the one who stubbornly held on to our fragile relationship. Julian, you probably don't know, but I've been secretly in love with you for a full decade. When I was 15, I was invited to your coming-of-age party. It's absurd, but it was the first time I ever saw you, and it was love at first sight. At 18, you were already a young man, so distinguished and handsome. All the girls there were smitten with you, and I was no exception. From that day on, I fell into a long, one-sided love. When I turned 20, I wanted to summon the courage to confess to you. I secretly followed you one day, only to find you'd been in a car accident. You have no idea, my heart nearly stopped from fear. There were screams everywhere, and on top of that, it was snowing heavily. I was so afraid you would die, so I risked my life to drag you out of the car. I wanted to take you to a doctor, but before I could get very far, the car exploded and I was knocked unconscious. I never expected that when I woke up, Sylvia had become the one who saved you. I had snuck out of the house alone that day, so no one could vouch for me. I couldn't defend myself and could only watch as Sylvia took my place. When I was 22, the Hawthorne Group faced a financial crisis. I went to beg my father to help you. Dad knew I had loved you for years, so he proposed a marriage alliance. And so, in the 7th year of my unrequited love, I married you. Julian, you know what happened after that. I just didn't expect that after 3 years of marriage, I still couldn't make you fall in love with me. It's a little disheartening. But loving someone has always been about giving without expecting anything in return. Besides, I'm in the final stages of stomach cancer and can't stay with you any longer. Julian, I'm sorry for selfishly taking up 3 years of your life. But now, I've decided to return you to the woman you truly love, Sylvia. I will donate my heart to her as a way to make amends for her jumping into the sea because of our marriage announcement. Julian, since I was a source of disgust for you in life, let me use my final moments to do something that will make you happy. I wish you and Sylvia a long, happy life together. Julian, if I trade my life for Sylvia's, will you feel even a flicker of love or reluctance for me? Oh, there I go, talking nonsense again. Let's end it here. This can be the final chapter of my 10-year crush. Julian, take care of yourself. Remember to be happy, to be joyful. Julian couldn't hear the rest of the words because he was already overcome with tears, sobbing uncontrollably. Only now did Julian belatedly realize that his feelings for Grace had long ago grown into much more than just a little bit of love. Chapter 14. Everyone thought Julian Hawthorne loved Sylvia Ainsworth, including Sylvia herself. But only Julian knew the truth. He felt nothing but gratitude toward Sylvia. Julian had always been a man of deep loyalty and honor. As his savior, he naturally felt obligated to grant Sylvia's every wish. He would give her anything, except his love. So, to outsiders, it appeared that Julian doted on Sylvia, spoiling her endlessly, but that wasn't the reality. This was especially true after Sylvia developed heart failure, supposedly because of Grace. As Grace's husband, Julian's sense of guilt towards Sylvia grew even stronger. Julian had thought that once a suitable heart was found and Sylvia's heart condition was cured, he would have saved her life in return. Their life-saving debt would be settled, and he would no longer need to have extensive contact with her. But Julian never, ever imagined that this one matter would cost him the life of his beloved wife. Did Julian love Grace? The answer, of course, was yes. Otherwise, he wouldn't have agreed to the marriage alliance proposed by the Ainsworth Group 3 years ago. After all, Julian Hawthorne was not the kind of man to sacrifice his family for his career. But it was precisely this event that became the greatest wedge between him and Grace. Julian couldn't accept the fact that the woman he loved had seemingly taken advantage of his crisis. Thus, Julian's love for Grace turned to resentment, which was why he never showed her a kind face. But every time he saw Grace's lonely expression, his heart would churn with frustration. He couldn't bring himself to overcome that barrier and reconcile with her. So they tortured each other for 3 years, ending in a tragedy of life and death. Julian held Grace's urn, sitting in her room, refusing to eat or drink for 2 whole days. At first, he wept in despair. Then, his tears flowed silently. Finally, he just sat there, motionless, as if the most important part of his heart had been carved out. 2 days later, a recovering Sylvia Ainsworth knocked on his door. The household staff, seeing it was Sylvia, didn't dare to stop her. Although their loyalty lay with Grace, they knew how important Sylvia was to Julian. Sylvia called out Julian's name several times, but got no answer. Finding it strange, she went straight upstairs. Passing Grace's room, Sylvia finally saw Julian, and she was shocked by the sight. She had never seen Julian like this. His eyes were vacant, his appearance disheveled, his clothes rumpled, and a stubble of a beard shadowed his chin. The room itself was in complete disarray. But Julian, a man normally obsessed with cleanliness, seemed oblivious to it all, just sitting on the floor, tightly clutching the small white porcelain urn. Sylvia immediately realized that the urn must contain Grace's ashes. So Julian was in this state because of Grace's death? Though surprised, Sylvia couldn't suppress a surge of joy. That bitch Grace was finally dead. Now, no one could compete with her for the position of Mrs. Hawthorne. She had known all along that Grace's heart was a match for her. In truth, Sylvia never had heart failure. All she wanted was Julian's guilt and affection. She just hadn't expected Grace to be foolish enough to voluntarily donate her heart. What an idiot, but even if Grace hadn't been willing, Sylvia had plenty of ways to force her out. After all, what Sylvia wanted was never Grace's life, but the title of Mrs. Hawthorne. Chapter 15. Sylvia suppressed the delight on her face, replacing it with a look of concern as she walked in. "Julian, what's wrong? You haven't been to the hospital to see me these past 2 days. I was so scared." Julian lifted his gaze to look at Sylvia. Sylvia couldn't help but shiver. For some reason, she felt that the way Julian looked at her had changed. Could he have found out about Grace? But then she thought, Grace is already dead. The dead can't testify, so what if Julian knew? Julian let out a cold laugh. Sylvia couldn't wait any longer. Can a patient who just had a heart transplant be up and about so quickly? Sylvia was at a loss for words. "Julian, what are you joking about? You know I have a strong constitution. If Grace hadn't pushed me into the sea, I wouldn't have gotten so sick." Julian scoffed. "Sylvia, are you going to keep acting? It wasn't Grace who pushed you back then, you jumped in yourself. And you have a diving certificate and are a national-level swimmer. That shallow water was nothing to you, yet you pretended you couldn't swim and faked drowning." Sylvia's heart fluttered with panic. How did Julian know all this? She failed to notice the change in how he referred to Grace. Sylvia maintained a calm facade. "Julian, don't listen to Grace's nonsense. She's just jealous that you're good to me." "Sylvia, you don't really think I'm so captivated by your beauty that I've lost my senses, do you? I was good to you because I thought you were the one who saved me from the car crash." Seeing the situation turn sour, Sylvia immediately played the victim. "Yes, Julian, you have no idea how scared I was when I found you at the crash site. I kept giving you CPR until the ambulance arrived. The doctors even said that it was thanks to my CPR that you were safe." She began to cry piteously. Julian stood up, his voice filled with disappointment. "Sylvia, I was holding on to a sliver of hope that you would be honest with me. I never thought you would remain so unrepentant. When I had the car accident, I was clearly trapped underneath the car. I tried to crawl out, but my leg was pinned by the driver's cabin, and I passed out. It was Grace who risked her life to drag me out of the wreckage. Otherwise, I would have been blown to pieces by the gasoline explosion. Sylvia, I never imagined you could be so malicious as to steal the credit for Grace's life-saving act." With her lies exposed, Sylvia dropped the pretense. "Yes, I took Grace's place, so what? I knew you were a man of loyalty and honor, so I used a little trick to try and become Mrs. Hawthorne. But I never expected that bitch Grace would end up taking that position." Hearing Sylvia speak ill of Grace, Julian could no longer hold back and slapped her hard across the face. Sylvia's head buzzed from the impact. She covered her face in shock. "Julian Hawthorne, you dare to hit me? This slap is for Grace." Sylvia laughed like a madwoman. "Grace. How affectionate. Julian Hawthorne, do you know why I tried to take Grace's place 5 years ago? It was because your Hawthorne family was at its peak, and I coveted the position of Mrs. Hawthorne. But who knew that after that, your Hawthorne Group would start to decline, even nearing bankruptcy 3 years ago. Julian Hawthorne, let me tell you, even I wouldn't have wanted the position of Mrs. Hawthorne back then. Who would want to endure hardships with you? I only ever liked your money. Only a foolish woman like Grace would marry down to you with a huge dowry at a time like that. Chapter 16. Yes, besides a foolish woman like Grace, who would ever make such a losing deal? It was such a simple truth, yet it took Julian years to understand it. Julian was silent for a long time, then pointed to the door. Get out, I never want to see you again. As soon as he finished speaking, 2 bodyguards in black suits entered and escorted Sylvia out. Sylvia's maniacal laughter faded into the distance. Julian Hawthorne, let me tell you, it's too late. Grace is dead, she's never coming back to you. With Sylvia's departure, the villa returned to silence, but her last words echoed relentlessly in Julian's ears. Grace is dead, she's never coming back to you. Grace is dead, she's never coming back to you. Julian staggered, feeling a wave of dizziness. He suddenly noticed that Sylvia seemed to have dropped something on the floor. He took a few steps forward and saw a small notebook. Feeling curious, Julian bent down and picked it up. He flipped open a random page and found that the notebook was filled with dense handwriting. It was all Grace's. Julian's hand tightened around the notebook. He quickly flipped through a few more pages, confirming that it was indeed Grace's notebook. But how did Grace's notebook end up with Sylvia? With trembling hands, Julian carefully read through it, page by page. He discovered that every word recorded his habits, his joys, and his sorrows. Julian's stomach is weak. Please try to let him eat home-cooked meals. Eating out too much will make his stomach uncomfortable. Julian likes to drink soup, especially these few kinds. I've written the recipes below. If you can't understand them, you can ask the housekeeper. Julian is a very light sleeper and needs complete silence. I've put his usual earplugs in the second drawer of the nightstand. He only uses that specific brand, don't get it wrong. Julian is a neat freak and doesn't like others touching his clothes. So, Miss Ainsworth, you'll need to put his clothes in the closet yourself. The clothes in the closet must be arranged by season and color, from light to dark. Please don't mess it up, or Julian will be upset. Grace had filled an entire notebook with Julian's various habits and preferences. At the very end of the notebook, she had written a final message. Miss Ainsworth, I sincerely wish you and Julian all the best. This notebook records all of Julian's habits and preferences. I hope they can help you. This is the last thing I can do for you both. I'm sorry. Although it wasn't intentional, I did get in the way of your love. Regarding the incident 3 years ago when you jumped into the sea, although I didn't push you, I bear an undeniable responsibility for causing you to suffer from myocarditis and heart failure. But rest assured, although Julian and I were married for 3 years, you are the only one he loves. The look in the eyes of someone in love cannot be hidden. He really seems to love you. I have already proposed a divorce to Julian. You can be at ease. From now on, I will never appear before you again. I wish you 100 years of happiness together. I heard from Julian that a suitable heart has been found for you. Congratulations, Miss Ainsworth. Finally, please live well and do not betray Julian's love. Julian's tears fell onto the small notebook, smudging Grace's elegant handwriting. Aheg, Julian clutched his head, letting out a desperate, guttural roar. What had he done all these years? He had pushed the wife who loved him so deeply into an abyss of despair. The next moment, overcome with emotion, Julian collapsed to the floor with a thud. Chapter 17. When Julian woke up, a day had passed. He stared blankly at the ceiling of the hospital room, but the person who used to care for him so meticulously was no longer there. Julian closed his eyes in agony. He wished he had never woken up. The one who deserved to die was clearly him, but he couldn't. There were still too many things waiting for him to do. The Hawthorne Group, his parents, the subsidiary companies Grace had left him, and Grace's imprisoned father waiting to be saved. From that day on, Julian returned to his normal self, eating and going to work on time every day, only with a ferocity in his work that was even greater than before. It was as if Julian had found a new purpose in life. He first reorganized the companies under the Ainsworth Group, bringing those dying enterprises back to life. Julian knew that Grace was the most filial daughter. That was why she had been so desperate to save her father's company, why she had humbled herself to beg him. But at that time, not only had he not helped her, he had humiliated her. A few days ago, while out for a business dinner, Julian ran into several business partners he hadn't seen in a while, partners from when the Hawthorne Group was making its comeback. Mr. Lawrence, seeing Julian had come alone, asked with some surprise, "Mr. Hawthorne, why are you here alone today? Where is Mrs. Hawthorne?" Julian was taken aback. Although his marriage to the daughter of the Ainsworth Group's president was no secret in their circles, from Mr. Lawrence's tone, it was clear he had met Grace. But how could Grace, a housewife, have met Mr. Lawrence? Feeling curious, Julian couldn't help but ask, "Mr. Lawrence, you've met my wife?" Mr. Lawrence looked astonished. "Mr. Hawthorne, don't tell me you didn't know about Mrs. Hawthorne negotiating deals for you 3 years ago? It's not just me, all the bosses here have met Mrs. Hawthorne." "That's right, Mr. Hawthorne. Back when the Hawthorne Group had its financial crisis, even with the investment from the Ainsworth Group, no other company was willing to partner with you. It was Mrs. Hawthorne who swallowed her pride and came to us to discuss business, and she even drank with us many times." Mr. Hawthorne, to be honest, none of us were optimistic about the Hawthorne Group back then, but we couldn't resist Mrs. Hawthorne's persistence. At that time, we agreed to cooperate out of respect for her and Mr. Ainsworth. Yes, the rumor about Mrs. Hawthorne being a heavy drinker with an incredible tolerance for alcohol started back then. She, a high and mighty heiress, humbled herself to negotiate contracts and discuss business with us. I remember someone deliberately gave her a hard time, but she endured it all silently. We all admired her from the bottom of our hearts back then. For someone so young to have such a broad perspective was truly impressive. "Mr. Hawthorne, you are a lucky man to have married such a capable helpmate. It's just a pity that the Ainsworth Group has fallen on hard times and is not what it used to be. But your Hawthorne Group, on the other hand, is doing better and better." Hearing their words, Julian felt as if a bolt of lightning had struck him from above. So, all those deals from 3 years ago were negotiated by Grace on his behalf. At the time, he had wondered why all the major companies that had rejected him one day were suddenly extending olive branches the next. And to think Julian had believed it was his own sincerity that had moved them. It was all Grace's doing. Julian felt dizzy, his appetite completely gone. He excused himself, citing illness, and stumbled back home. It wasn't until he saw the small porcelain urn placed on the nightstand in the room that Julian's tears finally, uncontrollably, fell. His Grace, in places he never knew, had silently sacrificed so much for him. To help him rebuild the Hawthorne Group, Grace had endured so much humiliation, and yet he knew nothing, never giving her a kind look. He was truly damned. Chapter 18. After a few days of wallowing, Julian transformed back into the ruthless work machine he had been. Under his leadership, the subsidiaries of the Ainsworth Group were revived and now showed signs of flourishing. Julian took it upon himself to pay off the astronomical debts of Grace's father, Walter Ainsworth, bailaid him out, and then personally picked him up from prison. Walter had already learned of Grace's death while in prison. Now, seeing Julian, his face showed little emotion. He just sighed. Grace's death was her own choice. Ultimately, it had nothing to do with Julian. Besides, even if Grace hadn't donated her heart, her terminal stomach cancer was a death sentence. So Walter patted Julian's shoulder. "Julian, give me some time, I'll pay you back that money." A look of pain crossed Julian's face. He shook his head. "No need. This is what I should do, father." After being married to Grace for 3 years, this was the first time Julian had ever called Walter father, and it was under these circumstances. Walter stiffened for a moment, then nodded. "Father, in the 3 years I was married to Grace, I received so much help from the Ainsworth family, yet I did little for you. Now that you're older, you don't need to worry about work anymore. I will manage the Ainsworth Group's subsidiaries. The profits that belong to you and Grace will be transferred directly to your account. Please, just enjoy your life. Travel, see the world, and don't worry about anything else. I will visit you often." Walter opened his mouth to say something, but in the end, said nothing, only sighing. He nodded in response, then turned and got into the Ainsworth family car. His figure seemed to have aged 10 years. One was a father who had lost his daughter, the other a husband who had lost his wife. But they were so estranged that they could find nothing else to say. Julian gave Walter one last look, then drove away. Upon returning home, Julian went straight to Grace's room. As soon as he entered, he carefully picked up the porcelain urn. His tone was gentle. "Grace, I've brought father home from prison. You can rest assured now. He's doing well, but he seems to have aged a lot. I'll visit him more often from now on. The companies you entrusted to me, I haven't delegated them to others. I've been personally reorganizing them, and they're all back on track now. I've managed to preserve your and father's life's work. As for Sylvia, I've sent her to prison for fraud. I've avenged all the wrongs she did to you. The notebook you left for her, I have it now. Don't worry, I don't need anyone else to take care of me. I can take care of myself. Grace, it's been a month. Why haven't I dreamed of you even once? Are you still angry with me? Are you still blaming me?" The only response was the silence of the room, but Julian continued to talk to the urn as if Grace were inside. From the day Grace left, Julian had moved into her room. He found that he couldn't sleep anywhere else. Perhaps it was because her lingering scent was still in this room, but now, even that faint scent was gradually fading. Meanwhile, in a hospital in the suburbs of the capital city, a woman who looked exactly like Grace slowly opened her eyes. Chapter 19. Grace opened her eyes, staring blankly at the ceiling. "Where am I? Heaven. But if I'm dead, why do I still feel pain?" Seeing her awake, Evan Kendall leaned in, overjoyed. "Grace, you're finally awake." Grace's eyes shifted, and she saw her old friend, Evan. Why was he here? Wasn't she dead? Her last memory was of lying on an operating table, preparing to donate her heart to Sylvia. She only remembered the surgeon giving her a dose of anesthesia before she passed out. Logically, she should be dead by now. Seeing Grace's confused expression, Evan smiled. "Grace, you're not dead. How could I possibly let you donate your heart to that wicked woman, Sylvia? She doesn't have heart failure. It was all a lie to deceive you and Julian." Hearing that Sylvia had faked her illness, Grace's face remained expressionless. After all, Sylvia had stooped to stealing her identity and falsely accusing her of pushing her into the sea. What wouldn't she do? Nothing Sylvia did surprised Grace anymore. And yet, this woman, with her clumsy acting and obvious flaws, had managed to capture all of Julian's affection. Grace found it utterly ridiculous. Grace managed a weak smile. "Evan, I knew there was something suspicious about Sylvia's illness, but I was already in the final stages of stomach cancer. I didn't have long to live anyway. What difference did one more or one less day make? It was better to let Sylvia and Julian be together. Evan, you shouldn't have saved me." Evan adjusted Grace's hospital bed, helping her sit up. He gently stroked her hair and smiled. "Grace, you don't have terminal stomach cancer. I lied to you." This time, Grace was truly stunned. She let out a soft "huh," "but you gave me so much medicine, my stomach hurt so much, and I was vomiting blood. If that's not terminal cancer, what is it?" Evan sighed. "Grace, you don't have terminal cancer, but you did have a severe stomach ulcer. The pain and vomiting blood were because of that. A few years ago, when you were helping Julian rebuild his company, you went out for business dinners and drank heavily, which damaged your stomach and caused the ulcer. The reason I lied and told you that you had terminal cancer was to make you see Julian for who he really is in a life or death situation. He is not worthy of your love, nor is he worthy of you doing so much for him. But I never expected you to bear even something like cancer all by yourself. In the end, your ulcer was because of him, and he didn't even bother to care about you." After hearing Evan's explanation, Grace didn't know what to say. She had thought she was dying of terminal cancer. At first, she had indeed resented fate, wondering why she, who had always tried to be good, had to have her life cut short. But later, Grace had come to terms with it. If this was how fate had planned it, there was no use in self-pity. She might as well use her limited time to do the things she wanted to do. So she had decided to let Julian and Sylvia be together, bringing a sense of closure to her decade-long love. But she never, ever expected that she hadn't died. Chapter 20. Seeing Grace's silence, Evan assumed she was still processing everything and continued, "Grace, your ulcer is almost healed. With a bit more attention to your diet, you'll make a full recovery. Don't worry, you'll be able to return to a normal life soon, just like before." Grace murmured. A normal life? What normal life did she have left? For the 3 years she was married to Julian, she had been a housewife, abandoning all her social life and personal ambitions. She spent her days at the Hawthorne estate, cooking and cleaning for a man who showed her no appreciation. Most of her time was spent managing the household. The rare moments of leisure she had, she chose to spend visiting her father, Walter Ainsworth. It was safe to say that Grace hadn't had a life of her own for a very long time. Because she had been deeply in love with Julian, she had found joy in it, believing that doing anything for him was natural and right. But now, having walked the line between life and death, all the entanglements of love and resentment felt like a distant memory from a past life. Yes, a normal life. Grace, is there anything you want to do? Any unfulfilled wishes or dreams? Or do you still want to go back to Julian? A flicker of pain crossed Evan's face. Grace shook her head. I'm not going back. And I will never love Julian Hawthorne again. Hearing her answer, Evan's eyes visibly brightened. Then, where do you want to go? Grace, whether you want to stay in the capital city or go somewhere else, I'll go with you. Evan, thank you. You really don't have to do so much for me, Grace said, her complexion still a little pale. Evan placed his hands on her shoulders. Grace, don't say that. As your doctor and your best friend, of course I should be with you. Besides, you know me, I've been tired of this hospital for a long time. I'd like a change of scenery too. Grace managed a faint smile and nodded. Okay. She hadn't yet figured out what to do with this vast expanse of life that had suddenly opened up before her. But she knew one thing for sure: she would never go back to Julian. In their 3 years of marriage, Julian's attitude towards her had been crystal clear. There was no place for her in his heart. To Julian, she probably ranked lower than his household staff. She had given her all for him for years, and he had never once shown her a kind face. At first, when she helped him rebuild his company, she had excused his poor treatment of her as stress from his business troubles. After all, he was incredibly busy. But later, when the Hawthorne Group recovered with the help of her family's company, his attitude towards her never changed. Grace had thought that with a long marriage ahead of them, she could eventually win his love. But she never imagined that between her and Sylvia, he would always choose Sylvia. On their 3rd wedding anniversary, Julian's vicious words had finally snapped the last thread of hope in her heart. She had finally accepted the fact that he would never love her. Since it was a question that would never have an answer, let this decade of love and devotion dissipate with her brush with death. She was going to start a new life, chapter 21. Evan Kendall, let's go abroad. Grace had made up her mind. She wanted to go abroad to fulfill the career dream she had left behind. In college, Grace had majored in fashion design and had consistently been at the top of her class. However, just as she graduated, before she had a chance to build her career, the Hawthorne Group ran into trouble. Through a family alliance, Grace married Julian and began her 3-year life as a housewife. Thus, her budding career dream was nipped in the bud by love. Now, it was time to pick up that dream again. Okay, Evan agreed, though a bit surprised. His parents had already immigrated and settled abroad, so going abroad would actually make it more convenient for him to visit them. The Kendall and Ainsworth families were old friends. Evan's parents had retired a few years ago and moved abroad to enjoy their golden years, leaving all their properties in the country to Evan. Since Grace had decided to go abroad with him, Evan sold off several of his properties, keeping only the Kendall family's ancestral homes and his own house, as he wouldn't be coming back often anyway. Grace and Evan set their departure date for a week later. Before leaving, they secretly went back to the Ainsworth home to see Walter one last time. Discovering his daughter was alive, Walter was overcome with emotion. Despite his age, he held Grace and cried like a child. Hearing that Grace had chosen to go abroad with Evan, Walter, though reluctant, was supportive. Grace, I know you suffered a lot at the Hawthorns these past 3 years, so I support your decision not to go back to Julian. Actually, back then, if I hadn't seen how much you'd loved Julian for 7 years, I would never have used the investment as a reason to marry you into the Hawthorne family. My daughter, Walter Ainsworth's daughter, could have married into a much better family. But as a parent, all I want is for my daughter to be happy. As long as I see you healthy and happy, I'm content. Grace and Walter hugged and cried, pouring out their hearts to each other. Grace's mother had passed away early, and Walter had never remarried. He had raised Grace as both a father and a mother, so their bond was exceptionally strong. Walter was furious when he learned that Grace was not happy with the Hawthorns, especially after hearing the rumors about Julian and Sylvia. He wanted to go to the Hawthorne estate and confront Julian. But every time Grace came home, she would lie and say she was doing well, that Julian was good to her. Walter saw through her lies but couldn't bear to expose them. He had been young once and had tasted love, so he understood Grace's feelings and thoughts. After news of Grace's death, Walter had seen everything Julian did for her and the Ainsworth family. He knew Julian regretted his actions, but now, seeing his precious daughter alive and well, he also knew that there was no future for them together. Because the heart that had once beaten for Julian had been personally crushed by him. After calming down, Grace and Walter began their farewells. "Dad, while I'm away, you have to take care of yourself. Don't let me worry, okay? And you must not tell anyone that I'm alive, especially not Julian." Walter nodded, thinking that Grace was becoming more and more like his late wife. "Grace, I'm at ease with you being with Evan. But you too also need to take care of your health, especially you. You need to protect your stomach and not let it act up again." After many words of advice, Grace finally said a reluctant goodbye to her father. Chapter 22. Before they left, Walter Ainsworth called Evan Kendall aside. "Uncle Walter, is there anything else you need to tell me? Don't worry, I'll take good care of Grace." Walter looked at him with a sense of nostalgia. "Evan, I've watched you grow up. Your parents and I have been old friends for years, so I trust you. Evan, Grace may not have noticed your feelings for her, but as an observer, I've seen it clearly. You've liked her since you were kids, always protecting her like a caring big brother. I know all of this. If Grace hadn't insisted on marrying Julian, I would have intended for her to marry into your family. But fate is a strange thing, and Grace met her tribulation in Julian. Now that Grace and Julian are divorced, there's more possibility for you and her. I won't object to your relationship, but I won't interfere either. Evan, the outcome between you and Grace is up to you." Evan's heart was filled with mixed emotions. He never thought that the feelings he had tried so hard to hide had not escaped Walter's eyes. He had so much he wanted to say, but in the end, he only managed one sentence. "Uncle Walter, thank you." Evan and Grace boarded a flight abroad. Looking down at the earth from the plane window, Grace felt an unprecedented sense of relief, a long-lost feeling of living for herself. The two went to France, where Evan's parents lived. After resting at home for a month, Evan went to work as a doctor at one of the largest hospitals in France. Meanwhile, Grace contacted her college professor from abroad and, after studying under him for 6 months, founded her own fashion studio. At first, she was the sole employee, creating handmade and custom design pieces. Each item in her shop was a unique, one-of-a-kind creation that could be altered to the customer's needs. This unique brand style quickly created a small wave of popularity. Within a month, Grace's schedule for the entire year was fully booked. Later, as she became overwhelmed with work, Grace hired a young assistant and then, from hundreds of resumes, selected 3 designers who matched her aesthetic. Her one-woman studio grew into a team of 5. The 5 of them were all young women from different countries, but art knows no borders. They quickly bonded, and the studio's business flourished, soon becoming a well-known handmade brand. With fame and profit came offers from several large companies wanting to acquire their studio. Others wanted to mass-produce their designs, but Grace rejected them all. Though Grace managed to protect her studio, she couldn't stop shameless imitators. Similar clothing began to circulate on the market, clearly deliberate copies, but Grace didn't pay it much mind. Her studio sold an aesthetic and a service, not just a single popular item. However, plagiarism could not be tolerated. With Evan's discreet help, they took the copying company to court and won, receiving a large settlement. 2 years later, Grace's studio had grown from 5 to 9 people. They set their sights on the capital city market and decided to open a branch there with their new collection. And so, after 2 years, Grace and Evan once again set foot on the soil of the capital city. Chapter 23. Returning to the capital city after 2 years, Grace felt a strange mix of emotions. Accustomed to the cobblestone streets and foreign alleys of France, she found the bustling, skyscraper-filled capital city a bit disorienting. Grace and Evan first went to the Ainsworth home to visit Walter. In the past 2 years, he had completely let go of company matters, spending his days fishing and hiking with old friends, living a life of leisure. Seeing Walter this time, Grace felt he looked much better than 2 years ago, as if he had become several years younger. Indeed, without the pressure of work, Walter seemed to have found a new lease on life. During these 2 years, Grace and Evan had repeatedly tried to persuade Walter to move to France to live with them, but he had always refused. Walter had grown up in the capital city and had dedicated most of his life to it. Now in his later years, there was no way he would immigrate to France. Moreover, Grace's mother's grave was also in the capital city, and Walter would often visit to talk to her. During the 2 years Grace and Evan were abroad, Julian Hawthorne would visit Walter at the Ainsworth home every Saturday at 7 p.m. sharp, chatting and drinking tea with him, playing the part of a model son-in-law. And the day Grace and Evan returned happened to be a Saturday evening. Seeing the wall clock was about to strike 7, Walter slapped his forehead as if just remembering something. "Dad, what's wrong?" Grace asked, finding his behavior odd. With less than 5 minutes to 7, Walter had no time to explain. He quickly pulled Grace and Evan up from the sofa and hurried them upstairs. "Grace, Evan, no time to explain, hurry up and hide upstairs. Julian is about to arrive, quick, quick, quick." Hearing that long, unspoken name, Grace and Evan exchanged a stunned glance. "What are you standing there for? Go." Just then, the sound of a car engine echoed from the courtyard. Julian had arrived. A wave of fear washed over Grace. She quickly pulled Evan towards the second floor, not forgetting to grab her shoes from the entryway. In a fluster, Grace instinctively ducked into her old room and shut the door with a bang. At the same time, the doorbell rang. Walter glanced upstairs, then quickly cleared the 2 extra teacups from the coffee table before calmly going to open the door for Julian. Julian had a faint smile on his face as he greeted, "Father." Walter grunted in response and welcomed him in. Julian noticed that Walter had taken longer than usual to open the door. He discreetly scanned the living room and saw no one. He chalked it up to being overly sensitive and proceeded to take his personal slippers from the shoe cabinet. But he noticed that 2 pairs of slippers seemed to be missing from the cabinet. Julian's hand paused. After changing his shoes, he followed Walter to the living room and sat down. Walter poured him a cup of tea, and Julian thanked him. Holding the warm cup, he felt a sense of strangeness everywhere. The number of teacups on the tea tray seemed different from usual, and there were fresh grape skins in the trash can, clearly thrown in not long ago. Julian raised an eyebrow, took a sip of tea, and then asked casually, "Father, did you have guests over just now?" Chapter 24. Walter's heart skipped a beat. He knew this young man was sharp, but he hadn't expected him to notice something was off so quickly. However, Walter wasn't sure what had given it away. His heart was pounding, but he kept a calm facade. "Oh," he said, as if just remembering, "yes, an old friend dropped by." Julian nodded, not pressing further, though he didn't believe the answer. He knew Walter was hiding something, but it was his private matter, and Julian wasn't particularly interested. So, he continued with their usual small talk. "Father, the cemetery I built for Grace was completed a while ago. You can go take a look when you have time. It's right next to Mrs. Ainsworth's plot. I think Grace would be happy to be next to her mother." In the first year after Grace's death, Julian had stubbornly refused to accept her passing, carrying her urn everywhere he went. Everyone said that after the Ainsworth heiress passed away, Julian had gone mad with grief. But only Julian knew he just missed her too much. It wasn't until over a year after her departure that Julian finally accepted that Grace was never coming back. So he bought the empty plot next to her mother's grave and personally designed a memorial garden for Grace. From the initial design to the completion, it took nearly a year, finishing just recently. Hearing Julian announce the completion of Grace's memorial, Walter, who had just seen his daughter, couldn't help but twitch his lips. "All right, I'll go take a look in a couple of days and visit her mother as well. Julian, thank you for your hard work for doing so much for Grace." Julian shook his head. "Father, it's what I should do. What I've done for Grace is nothing compared to what she did for me." Walter nodded, unsure of what to say. He knew Grace was alive, so he no longer felt sad about it. But Julian was still in the dark, still grieving her death. And for the past 2 years, Julian had come to the Ainsworth house every Saturday without fail, for 2 hours, to talk and play chess with him, as if he were afraid Walter would be lonely. A pang of guilt hit Walter. Should he really keep Grace's survival a secret? But then he remembered how terribly Julian had hurt Grace, and his compassion was immediately suppressed. He could not let Grace and Julian have any contact again. After some hesitation, Walter finally said, "Julian, I know you're a good kid. You've been trying to be a dutiful son-in-law to me in Grace's place these past 2 years. But Julian, you're still young. You have a long life ahead of you, and Grace didn't leave you with any children, so I hope you can find someone else for yourself. Even if you don't get married, at least try dating. Julian, Grace's death wasn't your fault. It was her own choice. You don't have to live every day in guilt and remembrance of her. You don't owe me anything. I don't think this is what Grace would want to see either. We all want you to live well, to live happily." Julian was silent for a long moment before replying, "Father, without Grace, how can I possibly be happy? Every day I live feels like a punishment from heaven." Just then, a sound came from a room upstairs. Both Julian and Walter looked up. Chapter 25. Julian frowned, realizing the sound came from Grace's room. He stood up. "What was that noise?" Walter's heart leaped into his throat. He tried to act calm. "It's nothing, don't worry about it. Probably just something falling," but Julian's gaze remained fixed on the second floor. Feeling uneasy, Walter tried to change the subject to distract him. "Julian, I know how you feel about Grace, and since you insist, I won't say more. But if you happen to meet another woman you like, you could give it a try. I won't blame you." Julian finally looked away from the stairs and back at Walter. "Father, please don't try to persuade me. My mind is made up. I will never marry another woman in this life besides Grace." Walter sighed, but respected his decision. Just then, another noise came from the room upstairs. Walter couldn't help but facepalm, wondering what on earth Evan and Grace were doing in there. By the time he realized what was happening, Julian was already heading for the stairs. Panicked, Walter quickly followed. He knew that stopping Julian now would look too suspicious, so he raised his voice slightly. "Julian, what are you going to the second floor for?" Walter hoped that Evan and Grace inside would hear the commotion and find a place to hide. Otherwise, he had no idea how to handle this situation. "I heard a noise from inside. I want to check it out." Once on the second floor, Julian noticed that the door to Grace's room was closed, while all the other room doors were open. He turned and asked, "Father, has Grace's room door always been closed?" Walter's heart pounded. He feigned composure. "Yes, I usually keep it closed. I'm afraid it will bring back painful memories, so I only open it when I want to go in and take a look." Julian nodded, not suspicious. "I think the noise I heard came from Grace's room." Walter pretended to be surprised. "Oh, the noise came from in there? That shouldn't be. Maybe something fell in my room. Julian, why don't you check the study over there?" Julian's hand was already on the doorknob of Grace's room. Hearing Walter's words, he reluctantly agreed and turned towards the study. Inside Grace's room, Evan and Grace had clearly heard the commotion outside. Grace was in a panic, desperately looking for a place to hide. But her room was too sparse. No matter where she hid, she would be easily spotted the moment the door opened. The thought of being just a wall away from Julian made her heart race. She hadn't figured out how to face him yet. If possible, she hoped she would never have to see him again in this lifetime. After searching the entire room, Grace finally found a wardrobe she could hide in. Unfortunately, the wardrobe was too small and could only fit her. There was no way Evan could squeeze in. So Grace hid inside and told Evan to stay outside. After all, as Grace's friend, it was reasonable for Evan to be at the Ainsworth house. Just as Evan closed the wardrobe door for her, the door to Grace's room was pushed open. Chapter 26. After checking his own room, Walter Ainsworth saw Julian Hawthorne emerge from the study. "Julian, did you find anything unusual?" Julian shook his head but was still determined to check Grace's room. "I think the sound came from Grace's room. I want to take a look." Before Walter could stop him, Julian pushed open the door to Grace's room. Walter's heart sank, but when he saw Julian's calm expression after opening the door, he felt a flicker of confusion and followed him in. The bedroom was empty. After a quick scan revealed nothing out of place, Julian headed towards the walk-in closet. Walter broke into a cold sweat. He had no idea where Grace and Evan were hiding, so he could only say, "Julian, I don't see anything unusual here. Maybe we misheard. Let's just go downstairs." For once, Julian didn't respond to Walter. He walked straight into the walk-in closet. Hiding in a wardrobe, Grace saw Julian walking towards her through the crack in the door. She was so terrified she held her breath. curling into a ball and squeezing her eyes shut, waiting for the inevitable. Julian was about to pull open the wardrobe when a casual glance around caught sight of a familiar face on the small balcony outside the closet. He saw Evan Kendall sitting leisurely in a chair on the balcony, sipping tea. Julian retracted his hand from the wardrobe and walked towards the balcony instead. "Evan Kendall, what are you doing here?" Julian's brow furrowed the moment he saw Evan. Due to their history with Grace, the two men had never gotten along. Even after more than 2 years, there was no sign of reconciliation. Seeing Julian, Evan showed no surprise. He simply took a sip of his tea and smiled. "Why can't I be here? This is the Ainsworth house, not the Hawthorne estate. If you can be here, so can I. Does Mr. Hawthorne need to manage this too? That's a bit overreaching, isn't it?" Just one exchange, and the air was already thick with tension. Walter, standing a few feet away, and Grace, hiding in the wardrobe, both felt a surge of anxiety. Were these two about to start a fight? Julian's frown deepened. He remembered not having seen Evan for over 2 years. Why had he suddenly appeared at the Ainsworth house? Something about this felt strange. "So you were the old friend Father mentioned. Why weren't you sitting downstairs?" Julian found it odd. He and Evan had no new grudges. Why was Evan hiding up here? Moreover, this was the balcony of Grace's room. Of all the places to be, why here? "Because I didn't want to see you, so I made myself scarce." Is that a problem? Evan's tone was matter of fact. Hiding in the wardrobe, Grace couldn't help but smile. A good-natured person like Evan probably only adopted this sharp, unforgiving tone when dealing with Julian. It had been a long time since anyone had dared to speak to Julian like that, and for a moment, he was speechless. After a tense standoff, Julian was the first to back down. He returned to Grace's room and looked around one last time. The noises they heard downstairs must have been made by Evan. He had thought it might be. Julian shook his head. How could it be? His Grace was long buried. How could she possibly be here? Evan scoffed from behind him. "Julian Hawthorne, stop looking. Grace is never coming back. I told you before, one day you will regret everything you've done. Do you remember how you answered me back then? You said, 'That day will never come.'" Julian lowered his head, said nothing, and silently left the room. Chapter 27. Walter Ainsworth followed Julian Hawthorne out of the room, remembering to close the door behind them. Seeing Julian's silence, Walter couldn't help but speak up. "Julian, don't take it to heart. Evan is just like that. Whenever it comes to anything related to Grace, his words are always sharp. You know how he is." Julian grunted in acknowledgement. "Father, it's all right. I didn't take it to heart." "Good, as long as you didn't. I didn't tell you Evan was here earlier because I was afraid you two would argue. I didn't expect you to find out anyway." "Father, I understand. Since you still have a guest, I'll be heading back now," Julian said, indicating he was leaving. Walter quickly agreed. "All right, I won't see you out then. Come visit often." After seeing Julian off, Walter finally breathed a sigh of relief and hurried back to Grace's room on the second floor, opening the door. "Grace, Evan, you can come out now." "He's gone." Grace was just climbing out of the wardrobe. Having squatted inside for so long, her legs had gone numb. Evan quickly steadied her. After not seeing Julian for 2 years, Grace felt a wave of complex emotions. She asked, "Dad, why did he come over at this time?" Walter sighed. "Grace, ever since Julian thought you passed away, he's come to visit me every Saturday at this time, to chat and play chess. Maybe he's trying to make it up to you. He just told me that he built a memorial for you next to your mother's grave. It's finished now, and he told me to go see it when I have time." "Grace, you don't know, Julian personally designed that memorial. Every plant, every tree was part of his design, and he often went to supervise the construction himself. In short, he put a lot of heart into it. I think he truly regrets what he did and feels he owes you. These past few years, besides work, Julian's life has revolved around you. In the first year after you left, he refused to accept that you were gone. Everyone thought he was losing his mind. But last year, he finally seemed to come to terms with it, and then he poured all his energy into building your memorial. The Ainsworth subsidiaries you left to him, he's managed them well all these years. At first, I thought he would just merge them into the Hawthorne Group for easier management, but he didn't. He kept the Ainsworth Group name. And every month, he deposits my share and your share of the profits into my account. Grace, I've saved your share in this card. Take it. The password is your mother's birthday." With that, Walter took a bank card from the coffee table drawer and handed it to Grace. Grace didn't take it, pushing it back towards her father. "Dad, you keep it, I don't need it." Walter knew Grace's studio was doing well and she wasn't short on money, so he didn't insist. He sighed again. "Grace, although I know Julian did many things to hurt you, I think he genuinely knows he was wrong. I've seen everything he's done for you these past 2 years. You have no idea how many times I felt so guilty I almost told him you were still alive, but I managed to hold back. After all, I can't make decisions for you. I see you're doing well after leaving him, and you probably wouldn't want to go back. So, I just told him to try and find a nice girl and not to keep waiting for you." Evan, standing nearby, pouted as he heard Walter speak so highly of Julian and glanced at Grace. Grace smiled, took Evan's hand, and said to her father, "Dad, why do you keep bringing up irrelevant people in front of my boyfriend?" Chapter 28. As soon as Grace said this, both Walter and Evan froze. Walter quickly became excited, looking at their joined hands, and stammered in astonishment, "Grace, you too? Really? Are you really together?" Grace held up their intertwined hands and smiled. "Of course, it's real, Dad. Why would I lie to you?" Walter beamed, realizing he had just misspoken. He patted Evan on the shoulder comfortingly. "Evan, my apologies. What I said just now was nonsense. Don't take it to heart. I won't tell Julian that Grace is alive. I absolutely will not give him another chance to bother her." Seeing her father's quick change of heart, Grace was both amused and exasperated. "Dad, are you a master of disguise? Just now you were acting like you wanted me and Julian to get back together, and now you're saying you won't give him a chance." Walter waved his hand. "Dad just wants you to have a good life. Seeing someone take care of you, seeing you happy, that makes me happy." Seeing the indelible traces of time on her father's face, Grace's eyes welled up. She hugged him, her voice choked with emotion. "Dad, your daughter is doing very well. You have to stay healthy and happy every day too." "I will," Walter said, stroking her head lovingly. That night, Grace and Evan stayed over at the Ainsworth house. However, after Grace finished her shower, there was a rhythmic knock on her door. Wiping her damp hair, Grace opened the door to find Evan. She wasn't surprised to see him. She stepped aside, inviting him in. Evan didn't hesitate, slipping into her room and closing the door behind him. He then placed his hands on her shoulders, pushing her against the wall in one smooth motion. Grace stopped drying her hair, draped the towel around her neck, and looked at Evan's scrutinizing face expectantly. "What's wrong?" Evan frowned, slightly annoyed. "You're asking me. What did you mean by what you said to your father earlier?" Evan was in love with Grace, and he had been since they were children. But before he could take that step, Grace had already fallen for Julian. Evan would never forget the day Grace told him she liked Julian. It was a feeling of devastation. It was as if a gift he had been preparing for years could no longer be given. Evan desperately wanted to tell Grace that he had always loved her too, but he didn't dare. He lacked the courage. He was afraid that if he confessed, they wouldn't even be friends anymore, so he kept his feelings buried deep in his heart. For all these years, Evan had silently watched over Grace, hoping she would be happy and content. But when he saw how terribly Julian treated her, he wanted to go and settle the score with him, but Grace always stopped him. That's why he was so at odds with Julian. The man who had obtained the star he could only dream of didn't cherish her at all. For the past 2 years abroad, he and Grace had lived together, seeing each other every day, but Evan never had the courage to break the barrier between them. But he never expected Grace to lie to her father and claim they were a couple. What did she mean by that? Could it be that in their 2 years of being together day in and day out, Grace had fallen for him too? Chapter 29. Evan didn't dare to dwell on the thought. He heard Grace chuckle and say, "I meant it literally. What's wrong? You're not willing. If you're not, then just pretend I never said it." Evan froze, finding it hard to believe. "Grace, you mean? You're willing to be with me?" Grace nodded, wrapping her arms around Evan's neck. Her voice was calm and unhurried. "Yes, my dear Evan. You've liked me for so many years and been so good to me. Why wouldn't I be willing?" Perhaps because this moment felt too sudden, Evan felt the need to confirm it again and again. "Grace, don't lie to me. My feelings for you are a very serious matter, so I hope you'll think this through carefully before deciding to be with me, because I won't let go easily. If you decide to be with me, it means from this moment on, we are no longer just friends. Grace, have you really thought this through?" Grace dropped her playful expression and looked at Evan with a hint of exasperation. I have thought it through, and I've been thinking about it for a long time. But you never confessed to me, so I had to play dumb. Evan, confessing is a man's job, you know. How could you wait for me to be the one to break the silence? Tasting the sweetness of a long-awaited victory, Evan's eyes instantly turned red. Seeing his eyes well up with tears, Grace was surprised and hugged him. Evan, don't cry. Why are you crying? Evan hugged her back tightly, his voice choked with emotion. Grace, because I really, really have loved you for so many years. I thought I would never have the chance to be with you in this lifetime, but I never imagined a scene that only happens in my dreams would actually come true. I'm not dreaming, am I? Grace was amused by his words and gently patted his back to comfort him. You're not dreaming, it's real. Evan, I love you. Grace, I will love you for a lifetime. Meanwhile, Walter, who was eavesdropping at the door, couldn't help but grin in triumph before cheerfully returning to his own room. The next morning, Evan and Grace woke up early to visit her mother's grave. Grace hadn't visited her mother's grave in 2 years. In the past, she had always gone alone. Julian had never accompanied her. Now, 2 years later, Grace was finally no longer alone. Standing before her mother's grave, Grace looked at the warm, smiling photo on the tombstone, her eyes welling with tears. Mom, I'm here to see you. I've been an unfilial daughter, not visiting you for 2 years. I've been in France, starting my own business, and haven't been back. My brand, Ember Bloom, is now quite well known abroad. Our studio has grown from just me to 9 people. So I've come back to the capital city to open a branch. Mom, you'd be proud of me, wouldn't you? Mom, Julian and I are divorced. I'm sure you know from Dad. But don't worry, I'm very happy now and my stomach is completely healed. Grace took Evan's hand. Mom, Evan and I are together, the one you watched grow up. I remember you used to like him so much and joked about marrying me off to him when I grew up. Well, your wish has finally come true. Evan also spoke up. Mrs. Ainsworth, please rest assured, I will take good care of Grace. Grace stood before her mother's grave, talking for a long time, and Evan stood by her side silently, without any complaint. It wasn't until almost noon that Grace and Evan slowly left the cemetery. Suddenly, Grace said, Evan, do you think I should go see the memorial Julian built next door? I must be the first person to visit their own grave, right? Chapter 30. Evan was taken aback, taking a moment to process what Grace had just said. She wanted to see the memorial Julian had built for her. He supposed it made sense. The way Walter had described it the day before had made Evan curious as well. So he smiled and said, Grace, if you want to go, then let's go. But wouldn't that be a bit unlucky? Grace thought for a moment, chin in hand. I don't think it's a big deal. I don't really believe in superstitions anyway. So, hand in hand, Evan and Grace walked to the entrance of the memorial. Several large ionic columns stood at the gate, entwined with morning glory vines, creating a unique and elegant scene. The grandeur of the entrance was breathtaking, but Grace stopped at the gate. Evan looked back at her. What's wrong? Don't want to go in anymore? Grace shook her head. No, that's not it. Evan, can you go in and check first? I'm afraid if I go in like this, I might run into Julian. I don't want to see him. Evan understood and nodded. All right, I'll go in and check first. Grace's concern was valid. After all, Walter had said yesterday that Julian was very invested in this memorial, having personally designed and supervised every detail. It was highly likely he could be inside. Evan walked in alone and quickly disappeared down the long path. Grace waited at the entrance for a while. When Evan didn't return, she looked around. There was a large, fine stone at the entrance, carved with several powerful characters. Memorial to my beloved wife, Grace Ainsworth. Grace recognized the calligraphy at once. It was Julian's, his unique handwriting. The memorial was surrounded by plane trees. As the wind blew, golden leaves drifted down, creating a beautiful scene. Looking in from the entrance, she could see that the path, which was not too wide, was lined with all kinds of roses. If it weren't for the giant stone monument at the entrance, announcing that this was a cemetery, Grace would have thought it was some kind of rose garden. Countless roses of all colors swayed gently in the breeze. There were varieties she recognized, and some she didn't. All sorts of single-headed roses, her favorite flower. Grace couldn't help but walk in, gently touching a rose at her feet. She recognized it as a café latte rose, an extremely rare and expensive variety, practically priceless. The café latte rose originated from Germany. Unlike other roses, it had a unique color, a blend of orange and tea, with a shimmering golden sheen that was breathtakingly beautiful. Looking further, she saw several other rare rose varieties. She was drawn in, walking deeper into the memorial. This place was indeed styled to her liking, filled with vibrant flowers and plants, like a secret, hidden garden. Grace called Evan, but he didn't answer. With a sigh, she had no choice but to continue walking deeper on her own. After passing through a large sea of flowers and turning at the end of the path, she saw a vast expanse of green lawn. The lawn was mostly empty, with only a huge stone monument and a crystal coffin. In front of the coffin stood a figure. It was Evan. Evan. Grace called out to him and ran towards him. Chapter 31. Hearing Grace's call, Evan turned around and waited for her. Grace ran to his side and asked, "Evan, why didn't you answer my call just now?" "Sorry, I didn't hear it," Evan said with an apologetic smile. Grace shook her head, unconcerned, her attention immediately captured by the scene before her. The stone monument was simply engraved, "To my beloved wife, Grace Ainsworth." Below it were her birth and death years and nothing more. Behind the monument was a large crystal coffin, beautifully filled with preserved flowers, and nestled among them was a small white porcelain urn. Anyone could see that this was an act of extreme love and care, and Grace was no exception. At this moment, Grace's heart was filled with a mix of emotions. She turned to Evan and asked, "Evan, whose body did you use as a substitute for mine back then? How did Julian not find out?" Evan explained, "Sylvia never needed a heart transplant. She just bribed the surgical team to fake an operation. In reality, she just took an anesthetic and went asleep. So I played along. I found an unclaimed female body at the hospital and passed it off as you. It took Julian some time to get from his home to the hospital. In that time, I claimed that the donor's last wish was immediate cremation and had someone take the body to the crematorium right away. By the time Julian arrived, the cremation had already begun. He was so consumed by the grief of your death, how could he have had the clarity to think straight? Besides, he had seen your heart donation agreement and your terminal cancer diagnosis. The doctor had personally told him you were dead, and what he received was a pile of ashes. Was he really going to get a DNA test? Grace couldn't help but marvel. "So that's how you pulled it off." Evan nodded. "That's brilliant," Grace said, giving Evan a thumbs up. Then she added with a sigh, "Evan, thank you. If you hadn't saved me, I don't think I would have been reborn like this. I probably would have withered away under Julian's indifference." Evan lovingly stroked her head. "Grace, don't thank me. It's what I should have done. Every day I spend with you, I feel incredibly happy." Grace returned a radiant smile. They didn't linger any longer and left together. As they walked aimlessly down the street, Grace turned to Evan. "Evan, during those years I was married to Julian, I used to dream that he would love me. You always wanted to ask me why I fell for him, didn't you?" "It was when I was 15. I was invited to his coming-of-age party, and for some reason, I fell for him at first sight. When I was 20, I saved him from a car crash. I thought then that someone I would risk my life to save must be someone I would love for a lifetime. So I used every means I could to finally marry him. I was married to Julian for 3 years, over 1,000 days. Every single one of those days, every minute, every second, I was waiting for him to see my love, to love me back, even just a little. But Evan, you know what? When I walked into that memorial he built for me just now, I truly felt his love for me. And I also realized that now, looking at all the things I once longed for right in front of me, my heart no longer flutters. I have truly, truly let go of Julian. Evan, for the rest of my life, I will only love you." Chapter 32. Grace's studio was named Ember Bloom. To break into the capital city market, the entire team went all out. Only 3 designers remained in France to complete the remaining orders. The other 6 all came to the capital city. After all, they couldn't open a new branch without enough hands on deck. While still in France, Grace had already secured a location for the shop. Aside from being a bit larger than the one in France, the overall decor was very similar. When Grace and her team arrived at the new shop, the renovation was nearly complete, just waiting for the clothes to be put on display. The shop was located at the end of a bustling lane in the most prosperous part of the capital city. It had high ceilings and a spiral staircase, with 2 floors in total. The overall design was minimalist and grand, but filled with many clever details. When Ember Bloom wasn't too busy, they would also take online orders from abroad. However, unlike in-person fittings, online customization was more challenging. They could only design and alter based on the measurements and style preferences provided by the customer. Although they still received rave reviews, it wasn't as convenient as face-to-face consultations. The fans in the capital city were incredibly enthusiastic, which was one of the main reasons they chose to open a branch there. Before arriving, Ember Bloom had already announced on various social media platforms their plans to open a branch in the capital city, sparking a wave of excitement. Now, as the 6 of them stood in the new shop, the reality of opening a new branch truly set in. Who would have thought that a team established just 2 years ago could achieve such impressive results in such a short time? 2 years ago, they were just a group of young women. But this team, with an average age of only 25, had drawn a new blueprint for the cause of women's beauty. As the saying goes, clothes make the woman. Serving the lifelong beauty and unique charm of women had always been the mission of Ember Bloom. Seeing the team's enthusiasm, Grace was very happy. 2 years ago, when she first went abroad, the future seemed uncertain. Who knew that 2 years later, upon returning to the capital city, she would have a mature team and a well-known brand? Grace herself was overjoyed. Grace clapped her hands, signaling for everyone to gather. From today on, this is the new home of Ember Bloom. I'm very grateful for everyone's hard work over the past 2 years, which has allowed us to grow and become stronger. Now that we've opened our second shop, we plan to hold a live-streamed press conference in 3 days to build our brand's reputation here. In our previous online orders, the customers from the capital city were the most enthusiastic, which is why we came here. And I chose you all to come with me because your design styles are the most popular among our fans here. Let's do our best and make a name for ourselves in the capital city too. Grace shook a large bottle of champagne she had prepared and popped the cork. The 6 young women raised their glasses, clinking them together with the sound of dreams. To the grand opening of Ember Bloom's capital city branch, May Our Business Thrive, Chapter 33. 3 days later, the Ember Bloom press conference was held as scheduled. Invitations were sent to major media outlets and journalists, inviting them to attend. Some former clients who had commissioned pieces from the studio, as well as potential major clients, also came voluntarily after receiving their invitations. The conference, like the studio itself, had a simple and direct flow. Unlike other brand launches that were full of grand promises and empty talk, Ember Bloom's event was intended to introduce their studio's process and core philosophy, along with a showcase of past outstanding designs. The main goal of the conference was to let more people know about and understand Ember Bloom, thereby attracting more clients. Although the studio had already received a large number of orders before even setting up in the capital city, that was based on word-of-mouth referrals. In terms of overall brand recognition, Ember Bloom was not yet well known in the capital city, which was why they invested heavily in a live-streamed press conference. The event was entirely organized by Grace's assistant, Mimi. 2 years ago, when Grace first met Mimi, she was a recent college graduate with no work experience and no knowledge of fashion design, but Grace saw her potential immediately. Mimi was a ray of sunshine, instantly likable, and with her background in management, her organizational and planning skills were impeccable. Grace had entrusted the entire conference to Mimi, and she had done an excellent job. As it was inconvenient for her to appear publicly, Grace watched the stage and the audience from backstage. Mimi was extremely outgoing and never suffered from stage fright, no matter the size of the crowd. She volunteered to take the microphone, first introducing Ember Bloom's business model and the new shop, then playing a video of well wishes recorded by both new and old clients. Even Grace herself hadn't known about this tribute video. On the big screen, women of different nationalities, skin colors, and appearances, all dressed in their custom Ember Bloom outfits, enthusiastically recommended the studio's services and quality, wishing the capital city branch great success. They wore completely different clothes, stood in completely different places, and had completely different faces. but they all shared the same genuine smiles and a sincerity that was truly moving. This video of well wishes was more touching than any advertisement. Watching the familiar faces, all former clients of hers, Grace's eyes welled with tears. Perhaps this was the meaning behind her choice to start a fashion studio. To work for beauty, to live for creativity, and to strive to protect the smiles of women. But Grace didn't notice that a familiar figure was now seated in the audience. Chapter 34. While Mimi was passionately speaking on stage, Julian Hawthorne's assistant, Leo, leaned in and whispered, "Mr. Hawthorne, this is that popular studio from the last 2 years, Ember Bloom. They're a studio founded in France. In 2 years, they've grown from 1 person to 9, a relatively steady expansion. The founder insists on quality over quantity, never hiring new designers unless she finds someone she truly connects with. They specialize in bespoke, handmade pieces, with each garment being a unique, one-of-a-kind creation. They're currently the hottest high-fashion brand. This brand culture perfectly aligns with the tastes of the high society ladies in the capital city. I predict that in the next 3 years, or even longer, Ember Bloom's popularity will continue to rise. If the founder is willing, I believe they could open 20 branches in the capital city within 2 years without a problem." The Hawthorne Group was planning to enter the fashion market, and Ember Bloom, a rising star, was like a prime cut of steak for a giant like the Hawthorne Group, the perfect target for acquisition. This was why Julian had come uninvited with his assistant today. The other members of the studio didn't know about Grace and Julian's tumultuous past, so when Julian identified himself, they readily let him in. Listening to Leo's report, Julian nodded nonchalantly. This brand style does align well with the Hawthorne Group's. Go draft 2 contracts, one for an acquisition and one for a partnership. See which one the founder is willing to accept. You can offer a high price. If we acquire them now, we can conservatively expect to double our profits." Leo nodded, taking note of Julian's instructions. After watching the video of well wishes, Julian raised an eyebrow in surprise. For a man whose daily attire consisted of unchanging shirts and suits, he couldn't understand why a piece of clothing could bring such a radiant smile to a woman's face. To Julian, clothes were just something to wear. His daily outfits were chosen by a personal stylist, so to him, every day's clothes were the same. He found no joy in fashion. This was perhaps the difference between an emotional and a rational mind. Julian couldn't help but recall that when Grace was still around, she would often try to catch his eye by changing her outfits. But back then, Julian was never willing to spare her a second glance. Now he couldn't see her even if he wanted to. The thought of Grace cast a shadow over his mood. He had thought that with time, his feelings for Grace would fade. But the love he had finally discovered and the regret that came far too late were like wildfire that couldn't be extinguished. They didn't even need a spring breeze to take root and grow again. Julian belatedly realized that he simply couldn't let go of his feelings for Grace. Those feelings had already become a part of his very being, like a piece of his own body. How could he possibly cut it away? Julian could no longer listen to Mimi's eloquent speech on stage. He gave Leo a few instructions to handle the tasks he'd assigned, then quietly slipped away. In truth, Julian had no urgent matters to attend to. He just didn't want to waste any more time on things that felt meaningless. He stood up, buttoned his suit jacket, and took one last look at the venue. But in that one glance, he saw a figure he had longed to see for what felt like an eternity. Chapter 35. Julian glanced towards the backstage area and saw a familiar figure flash by. It was just for a moment, and then the figure was gone. Julian stopped in his tracks. He stood frozen, murmuring, "Grace." He thought it must be a trick of his mind, but he would rather be wrong 1,000 times than miss a single chance. Even with the slimmest of hopes, even knowing it was impossible, he had to confirm if it was really Grace. After a few seconds of hesitation, Julian changed direction and walked quickly towards the backstage. But when he got there, he didn't find the person he longed to see. Julian's handsome brows knitted together in disappointment, but he still approached a busy staff member. "Excuse me, are you with Ember Bloom Studio?" The person Julian approached was Christine, the studio's only French designer. She knew Grace, but only by her English name, Victoria. She had never asked for Grace's real name and didn't really care, so when Julian asked about Grace, Christine naturally didn't know who he was talking about. Christine shook her head. "Sir, can I help you? I am a designer for Ember Bloom, but we don't have anyone named Grace here." At the same time, Christine eyed him suspiciously. This man had an air of importance about him, dressed in a well-tailored, high-end suit. He didn't look like a con artist, but she truly didn't know anyone named Grace. Seeing the hurt expression on Julian's face, Christine decided he was just a strange person and went back to her work. Before leaving, Christine didn't forget to dismiss him. "Sir, if there's nothing else, please leave our backstage area. It's not open to outsiders." Julian, looking dejected, apologized and turned to leave. Though he knew it was impossible for Grace to be here, hearing the denial still left him with a sharp pang of disappointment. The figure he saw, it looked so much like her. But now, looking around the entire backstage area, he couldn't find a single face from the capital city, let alone Grace. Just as Julian was about to leave, Mimi's voice came from the stage. "Next, let's hear a message from our founder. Without her, there would be no Ember Bloom. Our founder is the soul of our studio. Due to some personal reasons, she cannot appear in person, so she will be speaking to us through an audio message. We hope you understand." Julian staggered slightly, slowly walking towards the exit of the lounge. But just then, Grace's voice, broadcast through the speakers, filled the entire venue. "Hello everyone, I'm Victoria, the founder of Ember Bloom. When I started this studio 2 years ago, I wanted to create a brand that was unstained by the mud of this profit-driven, fast-paced world. Since it's a clothing brand, I used the character for cloth instead of knot. 2 years ago, when I went to France alone, I never imagined that in just 2 years, I would be able to return to my hometown, the capital city, with my own brand and my own team." From the moment that voice sounded, Julian froze on the spot. That voice, it was the voice he had dreamed of, the voice he would never forget, even in death. It was Grace. It was really her. Julian immediately rushed back to the backstage area and grabbed Christine again. Startled, Christine cried out. He asked, his voice trembling, "Where is she? Where is your founder? The one named Victoria, where is she? I need to see her." Chapter 36. Julian's grip was incredibly strong, and Christine cried out in pain. Hearing that he was looking for their founder, Christine managed to say, "Sir, please let go of me. Let's talk this out calmly. Victoria went out, but she'll be back soon." Realizing he had lost his composure, Julian released her. Christine shot him a displeased look, thinking he was an irrational madman. Julian rubbed his temples. "I'm sorry, I was out of line just now, but I really need to see your founder, Victoria, about something urgent. Could you please call her for me?" Christine was extremely wary. If this man had something urgent to discuss with Victoria, why wouldn't he have her phone number? So, she gave him a dismissive reply, "It's very busy here and I can't find her. She'll be back soon. You can just wait here." But as soon as she turned away, Christine sent a text message to Grace. "Victoria, there's a very strange man backstage looking for you. He looks terrifying and almost broke my hand just now. Don't come back." Unable to contact Grace, Julian had no choice but to wait, like a hunter waiting for its prey. Now that he had calmed down, he had a moment to think. He was now 90% sure that Victoria was Grace. How could he ever mistake Grace's voice? Plus, she had just said that Ember Bloom was founded 2 years ago, which perfectly coincided with the time of Grace's death. Julian paced anxiously. The thought that Grace wasn't dead made his steps feel lighter. Although there were many suspicious aspects to Grace's death and resurrection, he no longer cared to dwell on them. What had happened in the past 2 years didn't matter to him. All that mattered was that Grace was alive and they had met again. No matter what, he had to get her back. On the other side, Christine, pretending to be busy, grew anxious when Grace didn't reply to her message. She knew that if Grace hadn't replied, it meant she hadn't seen the text. What would happen if Grace came back to the backstage area and ran into this terrifying man? Panicked, Christine decided to go into the main hall to find Grace. But before she could reach the door, Grace walked in. Horrified, Christine quickly tried to push Grace back out, but it was too late. Julian, who had been watching the backstage entrance like a hawk, had already seen her. His pupils contracted for a moment, and then he strode towards them. Grace hadn't noticed Julian in the lounge yet. Seeing Christine's unusual behavior, she asked with confusion, "Christine, what's wrong?" Before Christine could answer, a voice, all too familiar, came from behind her, tinged with an almost imperceptible tremble. "Grace, it's really you." Hearing that voice, Grace froze. She never imagined she would run into Julian here. She had been trying so hard to avoid being found by him, which was why she had stayed hidden during the press conference, refusing to show her face. It was only at Mimi's insistence that she had reluctantly recorded that audio message. But she never expected Julian to be at the press conference today. Julian didn't rush forward. Instead, he walked towards her with a look of disbelief, stopping a few feet away. He was terrified that this was a dream, a fragile illusion that would shatter with a single touch. But he saw it clearly. Grace stepped out from behind Christine, her expression neutral as she said, "Julian Hawthorne, long time no see." Chapter 37. Hearing his own name from Grace's lips after so long, even if it was just a cold, formal address, felt like a gift from heaven to Julian. He took a step forward, but Grace instinctively took a step back. Julian quickly stopped. "Grace, don't be afraid, I won't hurt you." Grace looked impatient. "Julian, perhaps you don't realize, but nothing you do can hurt me anymore. To me, you're no different from a stranger. I pass on the street every day." Hearing her words, Julian felt a bitter taste in his mouth. He knew he had wronged her in the past, that he had personally pushed away the person who loved him most. But now, he regretted it. He wanted to make amends, and he hoped Grace would give him that chance. "Grace, I'm sorry for what I did all these years. I don't expect you to forgive me. Just seeing you standing here, safe and sound, makes me incredibly happy. I never thought I'd see you again in this lifetime. How have you been these past 2 years? Is your stomach cancer gone?" Grace laughed, but there was no warmth in it. "Julian, so now you care. Where were you when I needed your concern the most?" "It's too late, you know?" Seeing Julian's downcast expression, Grace remembered what Walter had told her about everything he had done for her these past years. A part of her still felt a pang of pity. She softened her tone, sighing. "Julian, it's true, I didn't die, and my illness is cured. Back then, I had decided to let you and Sylvia be together, so I was going to donate my heart to her. It was Evan who saved me and took me abroad for treatment. I didn't intentionally hide this from you, but there's no longer any possibility between us. Julian, I can't go back to you. I don't love you anymore, so please forget me. Just pretend I'm dead." Christine, seeing that Grace and Julian clearly knew each other, slipped out of the room, leaving them a private space to talk. Julian had never seen Grace so resolute. The look in her eyes now held no warmth. The person who used to chase after him with a heart full of love was gone forever. After Grace had left, Julian had heard many stories from the maids at his home. Whenever he was home, Grace would always wake up early just to make him breakfast, but he never appreciated it. In their 3 years of marriage, they had eaten together at the same table a handful of times. He hadn't even spared a glance at the last breakfast Grace ever made for him. True farewells are always silent. Julian, who had left without a backward glance that morning, never imagined that it would be their last meeting and that it was their final breakfast. Grace had always tolerated him with endless patience, always waiting for him to come home. For over 1,000 days and nights, she had waited every second for him to fall in love with her. But now that he finally loved her, she no longer cared for his love. Julian was a businessman, a master of weighing pros and cons, of seeing a situation for what it was. He knew Grace no longer loved him. The most sensible thing to do now was to let go gracefully, to wish her well. But Julian found he just couldn't do it. Even with the slimmest of chances, he wanted to keep Grace by his side. Chapter 38. Grace, I'm sorry. I know I did many things to hurt you, and I truly know I was wrong. I also know you were bothered by Sylvia's presence, but I never had romantic feelings for her. It was only because she was my savior that I felt obligated to her. Grace, I never imagined that the person who risked their life to save me back then was you. I was so terribly wrong, and I refused to listen to your explanation. Sylvia stole your identity because she wanted to marry me to get her hands on my family's fortune. For all these years, I was deceived by her. I've already sent her to prison. She will spend the rest of her life behind bars. Grace, the person I've always loved is you, but I couldn't accept you using the investment as a reason to force a marriage between our families. At the time, my thinking was so shallow. I just assumed you were taking advantage of the situation, and my love for you turned to resentment. That's why I was so cold to you during our marriage. I couldn't accept being used by the person I loved, but I never realized you were just doing it because you loved me so much, trying to give me an honorable way out. Grace, I truly know I was wrong. I shouldn't have judged you with such malice. So I'm begging you, please give me a chance, okay? Hearing Julian finally unravel the mystery that had plagued her for years, Grace couldn't help but find it laughable. For years, she couldn't understand what kind of spell Sylvia had cast on him to make him despise her so much. She never imagined it was all because her good intentions had been so cruelly misinterpreted. Grace let out a cold laugh. Julian, your explanation now does nothing but make me feel that my 10 years of loving you were worthless. If you could judge me with such great malice, how much could you have really loved me? You thought Sylvia was the one who saved you, so you could put on a show of loving her. You say it was a show, but if I remember correctly, everyone except you thought you were in love with Sylvia, right? Now that you know I was the one who saved you, you come running, professing your love for me. If tomorrow it turned out someone else had saved you, would you fall in love with them too? Julian, you think you love me, but in reality, your love is just a sharp blade. It does nothing but wound me. You don't love me, the person you love most is yourself. Julian, let's not force this anymore. Let's part on good terms. I have a boyfriend now. Chapter 39. What did you say? Hearing that Grace already had a boyfriend, Julian immediately took a few steps forward. He reached for Grace's hand, but another man's hand slapped his away forcefully. Evan Kendall smoothly put his arm around Grace's shoulder and said with a playful tone, "The boyfriend has arrived." Julian frowned, looking at Evan, then at the hand that rested so naturally on Grace's shoulder. In that moment, Julian understood everything. "Grace, you were at your father's house that day, weren't you?" Julian suddenly remembered the shoe cabinet. There had been 2 pairs of slippers missing. How had he forgotten that? Grace nodded, unconcerned. "Yes, I was, but I didn't want to see you, so I hid. Is there a problem?" Her defiant tone was exactly like Evan's that day. Julian couldn't help but clench his fists. Seeing his reaction, Grace smiled. "Julian, I told you before, you don't love me. You're just used to me following you around for so many years. Now that I'm not, you're not accustomed to it. What's driving you is your possessiveness. You subconsciously see me as your property, so you can't stand me being out of your control. Julian, if you truly love me, then let go. I will never go back to you. The person I love now is Evan." With that, she looked at Evan, her eyes filled with a soft light. The way she looked at Evan was different from how she looked at him. When she looked at Evan, her eyes sparkled with clear adoration proof of her love. Evan affectionately tapped her nose, then, as if to deliberately provoke Julian, he leaned in and placed a gentle kiss on her lips. Grace didn't refuse, though a slight blush crept onto her cheeks. The light in Julian's eyes dimmed. When he first found out Grace was alive, he had been filled with immense joy. But now, reunited with her, Julian was certain that he had lost her forever. This kind of loss was worse than death. Julian felt his heart was like a torn pocket, with the wind whistling through the hole. "Julian, if you truly love me, then let go. I will never go back to you." Grace's words echoed in his ears. His fingernails dug into his palms. Seeing the 2 of them so openly affectionate, his heart sank and he made his decision. Julian walked past Grace, and as he did, he said one last thing to her. "Grace, I'm sorry. My love for you was never fake, not for a moment. But seeing you so happy now, I've decided to let go. Grace, if you 2 get married in the future, please don't send me an invitation. I wish you both happiness." Then, without looking back, Julian left. After 2 years, Grace looked at Julian's back one more time. This tall, imposing man was the object of her affection for all of her youth, but now she had found a better home, the best home. Grace averted her gaze and tightly squeezed Evan's hand. "Evan, let's go home." The end.